He built water treatment plants all over the world: Bangladesh, Kenya, Guatemala. Then the winch snapped and the bucket struck him in the temple. Now Daniel Shin has become water himself, a dead, poisoned lake. And the first person to come to its shore is a crying little girl who believes a spirit lives in the lake. Darkness, no top, no bottom, no air, no body. It presses in from all sides, as if someone had clenched the whole world in a fist and forgotten to let go. Daniel isn't breathing, and he realizes he shouldn't be. He reaches out with his hand, but there is no hand. He opens his eyes, but there are no eyes. All that remains is the cold and the heaviness and the sensation that he has been stretched out hundreds of meters in every direction. He feels the silt beneath him, rotting branches, dead fish, a rusty plow submerged so long ago that roots have grown through the iron. He feels every drop of himself, because he is the water, the entire lake. Black, dead, forgotten. Above, a gray sky, a bent pine tree on the shore, and a barefoot girl of about 7 stands ankle-deep in his water and cries. He hears no words. He has no ears, but the vibration of her voice travels through the water. Salty tears fall from her chin and dissolve in him. She places a rice figurine on a flat stone, a small one, a crooked one, the last one in the house. The rice cake touches the water with its edge, and something hot passes through Daniel. Not heat, not fire. Like the first sip of tea after a cold night. Like a mother's hand on your forehead when you're sick. He doesn't know the word jeong yet, but he knows that this crooked rice cake from a hungry girl has just brought him to life. A second ago, he was just water filled with someone else's memories. Now he is someone. The girl whispers, to him personally. She asks him to help her mother. She believes there's someone in the lake. And now she's right. The first thing Daniel does consciously is this movement. Not with his hand, a subtle current at the very bottom. He pulls toward the girl's ankle the root-of-an that had been growing idly by the shore for 100 years. The root touches her skin. The girl shudders. She looks down. She sees nothing. But Daniel knows that this root binds iron and manganese. He knows because 10 years into his past life, he built a water treatment plant where people were dying from what they drank. He doesn't remember his mother's name. He doesn't remember his address in Seattle. But he remembers that the marsh iris reduces heavy metals by 40% in 2 days if the flow is directed correctly. Tomorrow, the water in the girl's jug will be a little cleaner. That's all he can do. But it's a start. The girl walks away. Her feet splash along the wet trail up the slope. Daniel is left alone. He died. That's what he remembers. Louse, a well, a winch, a blow to the temple. His last thought was about the water sample he needed to deliver to the locals, then darkness. And now he's here, a lake, mountains. He shouldn't understand the girl's language, but he does. The air smells different. The sky is a different color. This isn't Laos, nor Korea, nor even Earth at all. Or perhaps it is Earth, but another one. He probes the boundaries of his body, 200 meters across, 7 meters at the center. Reeds. Dead reeds. The water is murky, too acidic. Lots of iron and lead from the bottom sediments. Organic matter rots without oxygen. There are almost no fish. 3 half-dead crucian carp and 1 catfish that should have died long ago but is still hanging on. Daniel mentally sketches a map, a professional habit. He used to arrive at a site with a team and equipment. Now he is that site. He tries to move. With a single current, the water shifts by a centimeter. He's exhausted, as if he'd lifted a truck. He tries again. 2 centimeters, easier. On the 3rd try, he sends a thin stream across the bottom like a finger. It's his only tool, the current. He won't come out of the water. He won't speak. He won't show himself on the surface. He is simply water that remembers what bioremediation is. He works at night, millimeter by millimeter. He nudges the iris roots toward the spot where the girl draws water. He compacts the clay at the bottom so the lead won't be stirred up by the wind. He stirs up the stagnant silt in the far corner where there's more oxygen. By dawn, it's drained to the limit. If water could have a headache, everything about it would ache. But 3 half-dead crucian carp swam through the western part of the lake for the first time, a stretch that had previously been a dead zone for them. A small victory. On the second day, the girl doesn't come. Daniel waits. He's worried, even though the water shouldn't be worried. By noon, he hears footsteps, heavier than the girl's. An old man is coming down the path, gray-haired, hunchbacked, a bronze bell around his neck. He sits down on a rock. He stares at the water for a long time. Then he mutters. The girl ran home yesterday and said the lake was warm, that the water had caressed her leg, that there was a spirit. The old man says his name is Boksu, that he's been the village shaman for 40 years, that he's come to the lake every spring and fall and has never felt a thing. Emptiness, dead water. But yesterday the girl brought a jug, and the water in it was clearer, just a little. Boksu is too old to believe in coincidences. He sits on the rock until evening. Daniel doesn't know how to prove himself. He ripples the surface, but the wind is stronger. An air bubble rises from the bottom, but it lacks the strength. So he does the only thing he can. He pushes a small white pebble, which had lain on the bottom since time immemorial, toward the shore with the current. The pebble rolls onto dry land and comes to rest by Boksu's sandal. The old man looks down. He looks at the lake. His face changes. He picks up the pebble with both hands. He brings it to his forehead, and he bows to the water. A warmth flows through Daniel from this bow, weaker than from the flatbread, but more steady, like embers, not a flash. Boksu leaves. He takes the pebble with him. On the third day, 2 people arrive, a girl and a woman. A neighbor is carrying the woman. She can barely walk. Her face is gray. She coughs up blood. She dips her feet into the water, and Daniel figures it all out at once. Tuberculosis. Advanced. And that's not all. Chronic lead poisoning. The source isn't the lake. It's a copper kettle in the house, poorly tinned. The family boils water in it every day and is slowly being poisoned. Tuberculosis is killing them. Lead is finishing them off. The village shaman has already ordered a shroud to be prepared. Daniel can't cure tuberculosis. There are no antibiotics. He has no help. He has nothing but water and knowledge. But his knowledge tells him 4 things. First, the clay at the bottom contains silicon and sulfur. Release them in the right concentration, and the water will become anti-inflammatory. Not a cure, but a lifeline. Second, on the north bank grows a shrub that shouldn't be here, ledum. 2 days ago, while rearranging the iris roots, Daniel accidentally brushed against it. Ledum produces essential oils that act as a mild bronchodilator. Third, the cauldron must be removed. Replace it with a clay pot. But how do you explain this to people who won't listen? And fourth, if you brew the bog rosemary in its silicon-enriched water and in a clay pot rather than a copper kettle, its bioavailability will increase 5-fold. Daniel gets to work. At night, he extracts silicon from the bottom clay atom by atom like a thread from fabric. By morning, the concentration near the shore reaches the desired level. At the same time, he nudges the ledum roots toward the girl's path. The branches hang lower. The leaves almost brush against the child's shoulder. You can't walk past them. Only the cauldron remains. No letters to send, no shouting. But Box is a shaman, and shamans see dreams. Daniel gathers all the warmth from the flatbread and the bow, and reaches out. Not toward the lake, not toward the shore, toward the consciousness of the old man sleeping higher up the slope. It's like shouting through a wall of cotton wool. Once. Twice. 7 times. On the 8th try, something gets through. In the morning, Boksu walks down to the lake with the face of a man who hasn't slept. He sits down on a rock. He's silent for a long time. Then he says aloud that he had a dream. A copper cauldron, green water, dead fish, and a voice that said one word: clay. Botsu doesn't know if it was a spirit or the ramblings of an old man. But just in case, he took the cauldron to the Pak family and ordered them to replace it with a clay one. They argued. Then they obeyed. The old man is still respected in the village. Daniel feels such relief that ripples spread across the lake from shore to shore, even though there's no wind. Boksu sees these ripples, and for the first time, he smiles. 7 days have passed since he woke up. Minso's mother drinks water from the new clay pot. The cough hasn't gone away, but there's less blood. Daniel knows that lead is no longer entering her system and that her body is now slowly flushing out the accumulated toxins. This will take weeks, but the course has changed. The woman is no longer dying. She's simply sick. The difference is enormous. The little girl Minso comes to the lake every morning. She brings either a rice cake, a handful of boiled beans, or just wildflowers. She places them on a flat rock. She bows. And she talks. A lot. Quickly. About everything. About how the goat gave birth to 2 kids, one of which is white. About how the neighbor's boy, Taehwan, is pulling her braid again. About how her mom ate a whole bowl of porridge for the first time today. Daniel listens and feels warmth spreading through him with every word she speaks. Not because the words are important, but because she speaks to him as if he were a living person. Not as if he were a god, but as someone who is right there beside her. He begins to understand how jeong works. It's not a prayer, it's not a ritual. It's a sincere exchange between one being and another. When Minso talks about the kids, she's sharing her joy. When she complains about the boy, she confides in him. Each such interaction is like a drop of hot water in a cold lake. Individually, they're nothing. But over the course of a week, Daniel has grown strong enough to move not just one stream, but 3 at the same time. He can lift small objects from the bottom. He can create ripples in a specific direction. And he can send dreams not only to Box. On the 8th day, he tries to speak for the first time. Not with words, with duckweed. The green duckweed on the lake's surface obeys him best. It's alive and light, and he can shift it into patterns with his currents. He tries to form a simple hieroglyph. Water. It comes out crooked. The duckweed drifts away in the wind. He tries again. Water. Better. 3rd try. Almost legible. It takes 3 hours and leaves him as exhausted as after a full day's work. But he can do it. He can write. Minso notices it the next morning. She's standing ankle-deep in the water when she suddenly sees the duckweed in front of her form a symbol. She freezes. She stares. Then she looks around. No one's there. She looks at the water. The duckweed holds its shape. Minso can't read. She's 7 years old and comes from a poor family in a forgotten valley. She doesn't understand what's written, but she understands that the lake is showing her something. She screams so loudly that birds take flight from the pine tree on the shore. She runs up the trail. Half an hour later, she drags Grandpa Bosu by the sleeve. The old man comes down, groaning. He looks at the water. The duckweed has long since dispersed. Daniel gathers his strength and reassembles it. Water. Boksu sees it. His knees buckle. He sits down right on the wet ground and stares at the hieroglyph until the duckweed fades away. Then he covers his face with his hands. His shoulders shake. Daniel isn't sure if he's crying or laughing. It turns out to be both. Boksu wipes his face with his sleeve and says he's been waiting 40 years. For 40 years he's come to dead shrines and empty stones and talked to the silence. And now, finally, the silence has answered. He asks aloud how to address the spirit. Daniel thinks. For a long time. Then he puts 2 hieroglyphs together. Tahoe. Simply after the name of the lake. Not because he wants to be a lake, but because, for now, it's the only name that makes sense. Boksu nods. He bows. He utters the full invocation. Spirit of Lake Tahoe, please accept my gratitude. And he places his portion of morning porridge in a wooden bowl on the offering stone. The warmth from this porridge is different. Deeper, calmer. The warmth from Minso is like a flash, bright and quick. The warmth from Boksu is like the roots of a tree, slow and steady. Daniel begins to understand that different people give off different kinds of jeong, and that he needs both kinds. By the 10th day, Daniel gets down to serious work. The bog rosemary has grown tall enough. Minso used to pick its leaves and bring them home simply because they smelled nice. His mother would brew them in a pot with water from the lake, not as medicine, but as tea. Daniel made sure the concentration of silicon in the water near the shore was exactly right, no more, no less. Too much silicon and the kidneys won't be able to handle it, too little and there will be no effect. He calculated it in his head just as he had done in the lab in Seattle. Only instead of a pipette, he had sediment from the lake bottom, and instead of a flask, an entire lake. 10 days later, Minso's mother sits up in bed, for the first time in 2 months. She still has a cough, but there's no blood in it anymore. Her complexion has gone from gray to simply pale. She asks her daughter to take her to the lake. Minso leads her mother along the trail. The woman walks slowly, leaning on a cane, but she walks. She reaches the shore and sits down on a rock. She dips her feet into the water. Daniel senses her body. The tuberculosis is receding. The lead is being flushed out. Her lungs are still inflamed, but no longer critically so. He intensifies the current around her feet. He enriches the water with oxygen. The woman sits with her eyes closed, and you can tell by her expression that she feels good. For the first time in a long time, she simply feels good. Minso stands nearby, holding her mother's hand. She isn't crying. She's smiling so widely that her cheeks must be aching. Then her mother opens her eyes. She looks at the water, and she quietly says, "Thank you. Just thank you." One word. Daniel feels that word pass through him, stronger than a flatbread, stronger than botsu porridge. Because this woman knows she was dead. She knows her daughter was already preparing to be alone, and she knows the water brought her back. Her gratitude isn't childish joy or the faith of an elderly person. It's the gratitude of someone pulled from the grave. Daniel feels his boundaries expand just a little. Literally. The lake has grown 3 centimeters at the edges. A trifle. But for him, it's like stretching his shoulders after a long sleep in a cramped room. He can do more. The news spreads through the village in a day. Pak's wife, who had already been buried, is walking, breathing, eating, drinking water from the lake and brewing some kind of bush. The village is small, 32 houses, 140 people. Everyone knows each other. By evening, 5 people are standing by the lake. The next day, 8. 3 days later, almost everyone comes. They bring offerings. Rice, beans, dried fish, wildflowers. Someone brought a piece of cloth. Someone brought a clay whistle. A flat rock by the shore is piled high with gifts. Daniel senses each offering, and it is here that he realizes the difference for the first time. Half the offerings are warm, from people who came because they are grateful or because they have hope. Minso's mother, Boksu, an old woman who lives alone on the edge of the village and whose knees ache. A boy of about 10 who dragged his puppy along to show it to the lake. A certain energy emanates from them. Pure, different, but pure. The other half, however, is murky. A farmer named Doksu came with a sack of rice. A large sack. A generous gift. But Daniel senses that Doksu didn't come to give thanks. He came to bargain. A clear calculation runs through his mind. A sack of rice in exchange for a good harvest. The offering is like a bribe, and this sack makes Daniel feel sick, physically sick. The water around the offering stone turns murky. Bubbles appear on the surface. A crucian carp flips onto its back and slowly floats to the surface. Daniel is in shock. He didn't want this, but the murky water washed over him like rotten food passing through his stomach. He feels nauseous. Within an hour, the lake in that spot is covered with a green film. Boksu sees the dead crucian carp and the greenish water. The old man isn't stupid. He looks over the offerings. He looks at Doksu's bag. He looks at the lake. And that evening, Daniel hears Boksu explaining to the villagers that the spirit doesn't accept everything. that you can't bring to the lake what you're carrying with an ulterior motive, that the spirit isn't a merchant at the market. Doksu takes offense. He leaves. He takes his bag with him. By morning, Daniel is feeling better. The green film is fading. The second crucian carp is alive. The lesson has been learned. Jeong must be pure, otherwise he is poison. A month has passed. Lake Taehu has changed beyond recognition. The water is crystal clear all the way to the bottom. Irises have spread across the entire western shore like a white stripe. The reeds in the north stand straight and green. The fish have returned, not 3 crucian carp, but 20. And the catfish, which now swims with the dignity of a master rather than a half-dead vagabond. Daniel worked on this every day. He redirected the root systems. He adjusted the acidity. He built filtration chains from irises, reeds, and special species of snails he'd raised at the bottom. The lake had become a living wastewater treatment plant. The pH rose from 5.8 to 6.9. The iron concentration dropped by half. Lead was nearly 0. If he had hands, he would have written a scientific paper, but he has no hands. There is duckweed on the surface, on which he arranges a single word for Minso every morning. Good morning, or nice weather, or just her name. Minso learned 3 characters in a month. She didn't know how to read. Now she knows a little. Daniel didn't plan to become a teacher, but it turned out that when you're a lake and your only language is written, the people around you start learning to read. Baksu comes every morning and every evening. In the morning, she makes an offering. In the evening, he sits on a rock and tells Daniel about the village, who's sick, who's had a baby, which plot of land yields the worst harvest, whose cow is limping. It's intelligence gathering. Boku understands that the spirit needs information, that the spirit isn't all-knowing, that it's powerful but blind outside the water. The old man has become his eyes and ears. In return, Daniel, through his dreams, tells him which herbs cure which illnesses. Boku thinks this is the spirit's ancient wisdom. Daniel thinks it's the pharmacology course he took during his junior year at the University of Washington. The result is the same. The village stops getting sick. Not immediately, not by some miracle, but week after week, people grow stronger. The children stop coughing up black water. Because there is no more black water. The elderly with aching joints soak their feet in the lake and say they feel better. Daniel enriched the lakeshore area with magnesium and sulfur. It's not medicine. It's a mineral bath. Like a spa. Only it's free. But the real breakthrough comes with the rice. The farmers of Male Goal diverted a stream from the lake to the rice fields back in their grandparents' day. The canal is old and half-clogged with mud. But water from Taeho still reaches the fields. And now this water is different. Daniel spent a week preparing it. He enriched it with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. He added spores of mycorrhizal fungi that attach to the rice roots and help the plants absorb nutrients. He adjusted the concentration so that the bacteria would survive in the warm water of the canal but wouldn't multiply to dangerous levels. It was all in his head. No lab, no instruments. Just an engineer's memory and a sense of intuition. The result? By the 5th week, the rice in the fields by the stream is twice as dense as in the fields near the wells. The stalks are thicker. The leaves are darker. The old-timers walk among the rows and shake their heads. No one alive can remember a harvest like this. Botsu doesn't explain it. He just looks toward the lake. The villagers understand without words. Rumors spread slowly. The mountains around Male Goal are high, and the roads are bad. The nearest village is a 2-day journey away. But merchants come and go, and merchants talk. The water in Male Goal is clean. Rice in Male Goal grows like crazy. No one is sick. The children are healthy. The elderly are sprightly. Something is going on there. By the end of the first month, Daniel is strong enough to communicate not only through hieroglyphs. He can create ripples that form simple patterns. A circle means yes. A cross means no. A wave means wait. 3 circles mean danger. It's a primitive language, but Minso learned it in 3 days. Baksu in a week. Now they can have a simple conversation. Minso asks if the spirit likes fried fish. Daniel responds with a circle in the ripples. Yes, he can't eat, but the offering of fried fish gives off a warm, oily scent, and it's pleasant. Minso is happy. She brings fried crucian carp every Friday. Boksu asks about serious matters. Widow John's leg is swollen. What should be done? Daniel spells out the name of a herb using duckweed. Boksu writes it down. He goes to the widow. 5 days later, the swelling goes down. And so the first month passes. The lake comes to life. The village comes to life. Daniel gets used to being a spirit, and he almost believes it will always be this way. Quiet. Peaceful. Small miracles for small people. But on the 32nd day, he senses something strange. At night, at the very bottom of the lake, 7 meters deep, where the silt is as thick as 2 people standing side by side, something is moving. Not a fish, not a root. Something inside himself. As if a part of the lakebed he'd thought was dead suddenly breathed. Once, quietly, and then fell silent. Daniel freezes. He listens with his entire watery body. Nothing. Silence. Silt. Darkness. But he definitely felt it. Something alive is sleeping at the bottom of his lake, and it just turned over in its sleep. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know that it's Seiron. He doesn't know that 120 years ago there was a spirit here who was sealed inside a mirror and taken away. He doesn't know that part of her remained in the silt and that he himself was born within those remnants. He knows only one thing. He is not alone in this lake. And that thought terrifies him more than anything else combined. In the second month, Hana arrived. Daniel learned of her before he saw her. During his evening visit, he told Boku that a traveler had been spotted at the pass, a young woman dressed in white and blue, alone, walking without a pack animal, just a notebook in a canvas bag and a staff. At first, the villagers thought she was a pilgrim. Then they took a closer look at her clothes and realized, a priestess of the old faith. Boksu said this so quietly, as if he were afraid the mountains would hear. The old faith isn't formally banned in Hadeshin, but the Order of the Bright Law doesn't like those who preach it. Hana's father was killed right before her eyes when she was 11. Daniel would learn this later. For now, he knew only that a person who could speak with spirits was heading toward the lake, professionally. Hanaso went down to Teho at dawn. She stood on the shore, not by the offering stone, but off to the side. She took off her shoes. She lowered her hands into the water up to her wrists. She closed her eyes. Daniel felt her touch and froze. It wasn't like it was with other people. When Minso entered the water, he felt a childlike warmth and joy. When Boksu touched the water, he felt faith and patience. Something different emanated from Hana. Focus. Absolute, single-minded focus. She wasn't praying. She was listening. And Daniel realized that she could hear him. Not words, not the duckweed. She hears the movement of the water. She senses his mood through the vibrations. No one had ever been able to do that before. She opened her eyes. She looked at the water. And she said quietly that she knew he was there. That he was young. That he was different. That there was something about him she had never encountered in spirits before. Daniel didn't know what to say. He formed a hieroglyph out of duckweed. Yes, Hana smiled. It was the first smile he'd ever seen on her face. Then she pulled a notebook out of her bag. She sat down on the shore and began to write. She wrote everything down. The water's temperature, its color, its smell, the plants around her, the direction of the wind, the behavior of the fish. She worked like a scientist, not like a priestess. Daniel thought that if she had been born in his world, she would have become a biologist, or an ecologist, or his colleague. That thought was the first one that caused him real pain in his new life, because he suddenly realized that he had no face, no hands, no voice. There was only duckweed and ripples and cold water, water in which he could touch strangers' wrists but not look them in the eyes. Hana spent the whole day by the lake. By evening, Boltu arrived. They talked for a long time. Hana told him she'd been traveling through the archipelago for 3 years, searching for the last surviving spirits. She'd found 4. 2 were very weak. One had already stopped responding by the time she left. Another was hiding in a mountain stream and was so frightened that he wouldn't let anyone near him. Taeho was the fifth and the strongest of all those she'd encountered. Boksu asked how this was possible. The lake had been dead for 40 years. The spirit had appeared less than 2 months ago. Where did such power come from? Hana shook her head and said she didn't know, but that this spirit thinks differently from the others. Other spirits act on instinct. They purify the water because that's how it's always been. They heal because people come to them in pain. The spirit of Taeho works systematically. He doesn't just purify the water. He builds chains. Irises for metals, duckweed for oxygen, snails for algae. This isn't a spirit, it's an engineer. That's exactly the word she used. Daniel, at the bottom of the lake, shuddered so violently that a ripple spread across the surface. Hannah noticed. She looked at the water and said aloud that she didn't know who he had been before, but she wanted to learn from him. Daniel thought about it all night. Hannah slept by the shore, wrapped in her cloak. Minso ran up in the morning with 2 flatbreads. She placed one on the offering stone. She handed the second one to Hannah. Hannah accepted it with a bow. Minso looked at her suspiciously. She asked why she was there. Hannah replied that she had come to help the spirit. Minso declared that the spirit was doing just fine without her. Daniel smiled to himself. If the lake had a face, it would now be expressing something between tenderness and awkwardness. 3 days later, Hannah suggested building a sanctuary. Not a temple, not a wall. A simple wooden pavilion over the water. Open air, without walls, just a roof and a platform, so that the offerings wouldn't get wet in the rain, and so that people could sit by the water without sitting on the wet ground. Boksu supported the idea. So did the villagers. They built it themselves in a month. Logs from the forest on the hillside, a thatched roof, a platform on stilts right above the water. Daniel asked Hana for one thing, not to block the sky. He expressed this through ripples and duckweed, 3 hieroglyphs. The sky must be visible. Hana understood. They left the center of the pavilion open, a square opening in the roof through which the clouds could be seen. Rain falls straight into the lake. The sun touches the water. Daniel feels the sky. It's more important than he can explain. While the sanctuary was being built, Daniel worked on another problem, the children. There are 14 children under the age of 10 in the village. 7 of them are chronically ill. Rickets, goiter, anemia, parasites. All of this is the result of poor water quality and poor nutrition over generations. Daniel cannot cure rickets with duckweed, but he can enrich the water. Calcium from the limestone deposits on the eastern shore, magnesium from the bottom clay, iodine from the algae he specifically grew in the warm, shallow waters off the southern shore, zinc from old organic sediments. All in microdoses. Everything is calculated. For 2 days, he mentally calculated the daily requirement for a child weighing 20 kilograms. He took into account that they drink the water, cook with it, and bathe in it. A triple effect. Through drinking, through food, through the skin. After a month of drinking this water, the children's teeth stop wobbling. After 2 months, 7-year-old Taewon, who used to be shorter than 5-year-olds, grows 2 centimeters. His mother brings her wedding ribbon to the lake. It's the only beautiful thing she owns. She places it on a rock and weeps. Daniel senses her and realizes that this is the most sincere offering since Minso's first flatbread. Because a mother who sees her child growing after years of illness will give everything. Hana writes everything down every day, every change, every remedy that Daniel passes on to her through Box's dreams or through the duckweed. She asks questions. Why irises and not reeds? Why does sulfur help the joints? Why do the children grow from the water near the southern shore? Daniel answers as best he can, with hieroglyphs, ripples, and dreams. Hana writes, over the course of 2 months, her notebook transforms into the first compendium in Hadeshin of what Daniel would call applied ecology and mineralogy, and what Hana calls the sacred knowledge of the spirit of Taeho. They're both right, just in different languages. Every evening, Hana sits by the water. She dips her hand into the lake. and Daniel embraces her fingers with every molecule. He knows it's a pitiful substitute. He knows she deserves more than the cold touch of the water. He knows he'll never be able to give her more. But every evening she comes, and every evening he embraces her, and neither of them speaks of it aloud. By the 4th month, the sanctuary stood ready. Simple, beautiful. 4 thick pillars of mountain pine, a roof of woven reeds, a platform of planks polished to a shine by bare feet within the very first week, a square window in the roof through which light and rain fell. On the platform, right at the water's edge, a flat stone for offerings. Now there was no need to wade along the wet shore to reach it. People would come along the path, climb onto the platform, and place their offerings right above the water. Rice fell into the lake. Flowers floated on the surface. The fish brought as offerings slowly sank and dissolved into the jeong. Daniel felt each offering like a heartbeat. The first pilgrims began to arrive from neighboring villages. Not in crowds, just 2 or 3 at a time. They came with skepticism. They left feeling bewildered. The water really was clear. The rice really did grow like nowhere else. The children were indeed healthy. The elderly did indeed move more easily. This is no legend. You could see it with your own eyes. An old woman from a village beyond the pass came with her sick grandson on her back. The boy was 3 years old. His skin was yellow, a swollen belly. Parasites. Daniel sensed the child the moment the old woman dipped his feet into the water. His liver was enlarged. His bile ducts were blocked. 6 months without treatment. Maybe a year. He infused the water around the boy with a specific combination. Tannins from oak leaves he'd been growing for a month on the eastern shore, zinc, and spores from a fungus that, in his former world, had been used as an anthelmintic in veterinary medicine. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Through a dream, he showed Box which roots to dig up and how to brew them. The old woman took her grandson away 3 days later. A month later, she sent word via a merchant. The boy is eating, his skin has cleared up, his stomach is soft. Daniel allowed himself to feel what he used to call, in his lifetime, professional satisfaction. It's that feeling when you've done your job right and someone is alive because of it. Minso is now officially the keeper of the offering stone. It was Hana's idea to give the girl a role. Not a make-believe one, but a real one. Every morning, Minso is the first to arrive. She washes the stone with water from the lake. She clears away yesterday's offerings. She arranges fresh flowers. She makes sure the offerings are laid out neatly. She does this with the seriousness of a surgeon. An 8-year-old girl with dirty knees and a face that can express nothing but absolute concentration when she works. Boksu looks at her and tells Hana that this child will grow up to be something unprecedented. Hana nods, she takes note. Toward the end of the 4th month, Yuna appeared. Daniel sensed her a day before she arrived. Not through the water, through Boksu. The old man came in the evening with a worried look on his face and said that a woman dressed in men's clothes had been seen on the road. Her hair was cut short, with a staff that had a silver pommel. Silver. Boksu uttered that word as if he were spitting out a stone. In Haedonshin, silver signifies the order of the bright law. Their ceiling mirrors are silver. Their staffs are silver. Their buttons are silver. A person with silver on their clothing is either a priest of the order or a former priest. Both are dangerous. Yuna Chang entered the village the way someone accustomed to not being expected would. Quietly, quickly, without glancing around unnecessarily. A gray men's robe, short hair, a beautiful face but as dry as a stone in the wind. She was 28 years old, but her eyes were older. She walked past the houses straight to the lake. She stood on the shore. She looked at the water, and she said aloud that she was a former novice of the Order of the Bright Law, and that she was here not to seal, but to warn. Hana stood beside her. Her hand rested on her staff. Her body was tense. A box was behind her. Villagers were on the path. Silence. Yuna said that 3 months ago, in the town of Sanshan, she had overheard a conversation between 2 merchants. They were discussing a valley where the water had become clear and the rice yield had doubled. They laughed. They said that the village fools believed in spirits. Yuna didn't laugh. Yuna knew that spirits existed. She had seen them being sealed. She had seen 3 of them personally. She had been present at the ritual. She had held the mirror while the high priest recited the incantation. 3 times. Then she left. Because on the 3rd time, the spirit they were sealing was the spirit of a stream in a mountain village. Small. Weak. The stream provided water for 3 families. After it was sealed, the stream dried up within a day. The 3 families were left without water. Yuna asked the high priest what would happen to the people. He replied that the celestial emperor would take care of them. Yuna looked at the dry riverbed, at the children standing there, staring at the bare rocks. And she left. She's been wandering the archipelago for 3 years now, looking for what she lost. Not faith. Meaning. She turned toward the water. She said that if there was a spirit here, it had something to tell her. Daniel listened to every word. He sensed Yuna through the water that touched the soles of her shoes. No jeong, no faith, no supplication, only weariness and anger. The deep, quiet anger of a person who, with her own hands, destroyed what she is now trying to save. He decided to take a risk. He formed a character out of duckweed. Speak. Yuna looked at the duckweed, at Han, at Baksu, then back at the water. And she began to tell her story. 3 hours, without a break, standing on the shore. About how the order is organized. 5 ranks of priests, 32 regional temples, the central temple in the capital, Hansong. The supreme hierarch, whose title is His Most Radiant Highness. He never appears in public. Everything is governed by 4 archons. Below them are the inquisitors, 36 of them. Each carries a silver mirror. The mirrors aren't just traps for spirits, they're reservoirs. Every sealed spirit transfers its power to the mirror. The mirrors feed the central temple. The temple feeds something in the basements. Yuna doesn't know exactly what's in the basements. She wasn't allowed in there. But she heard a sound from behind the closed doors. A ringing. Like 100 little bells all at once. Or like crying. She isn't sure. Yuna described the Inquisitor's tactics. They don't come with an army. They come alone, polite, educated. They live in the village for weeks. They drink tea with the villagers. They help with the chores. They talk about the great celestial emperor who loves everyone. And they wait. They wait until the spirit reveals itself, until someone slips up, until they find proof. Then they come at night, with a mirror. The ritual takes 1 hour. The spirit cannot resist. Spirits have no weapons, only people's faith. But people are asleep, and in the morning they're told that the spirit was evil and that the order saved them. Daniel listened and felt his blood run cold. Not out of fear, out of understanding. He was defenseless, completely. If an inquisitor came and waited until nightfall and brought out a mirror, Lake Tahoe would cease to exist, and he along with it. Yuna finished speaking. She looked at the water. She said that Daniel had to decide, hide or prepare. Hiding meant covering all traces, murkying the water again, stopping the help, becoming a dead lake once more. The pilgrims would leave, the rumors would die down, the inquisitor wouldn't come, but the village would return to the way it was. The children would start getting sick again, the rice would turn yellow again. Minso's mother will start coughing again. Getting ready means something else, becoming so indispensable that people will stand up for him, not out of fear, out of gratitude. So that when the inquisitor comes and says there's no spirit here, 40 people who know for sure that the spirit is there will answer him. Because their children are healthy, because their rice is growing, because their mothers are alive. Yuna said the second path was more dangerous, but the first was pointless. Daniel thought all night. The duckweed lay motionless on the surface. Hana sat by the water and waited. Yuna slept by the fire on the shore. Baksu had gone into the village, but Daniel knew the old man wasn't sleeping either. By dawn, he had made his decision. He arranged 2 hieroglyphs out of duckweed, the second path. Hana read them. She nodded. She called Yuna. Yuna looked at the duckweed. For the first time during their entire conversation yesterday, Her expression changed. She didn't smile, but the corners of her lips twitched. She said one word. "All right." And she stayed. Yuna stayed, and everything changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but within the small circle of people around the lake, a center emerged. Before, there was Botsu, who believed, Hana, who recorded, Minso, who loved. Now there was a person who knew the enemy. Yuna didn't pray to the lake. She didn't bow. She didn't make offerings. She would come in the morning, sit on the sanctuary's platform, dangle her legs over the water, and speak. Clearly, dryly, to the point. She described how the inquisitors hunted for spirits, what questions they asked the villagers, what details they paid attention to. The water is too clear, suspicious. The harvest is too good, suspicious. The children are too healthy, suspicious. The people are too grateful, suspicious. Yuna listed the signs one by one, and each one described male goal exactly. Daniel listened and realized they were sitting on a powder keg. Every miracle he performed was a clue. Every child he saved was proof. He was making people healthy, and in doing so, painting a target on his own forehead. Yuna suggested a strategy. Don't hide the miracles, disguise them. The water is clear, so an explanation is needed. Botsu must tell everyone that 3 years ago he cleaned out the spring upstream. He removed the rotten logs, he cleared the riverbed. Any inquisitor can go up there and check. Yuna asked Daniel to actually clean out that spring, so that the legend would match reality. Daniel reached the spring through the groundwater. It cost him 2 days of weakness, but the spring started flowing again. Now water was flowing into the lake from 2 sources, the underground spring that had always been there, and the mountain spring that Daniel had revived. There is an explanation for the clear water. The harvest. It's more complicated. Yuna suggested something else, not to hide the good rice, but to explain it through hard work. The villagers should say they've switched to a new variety, that they brought seeds from the south, that they've started fertilizing better with manure. Trivial details, but details that the inquisitor can verify and confirm. Hana objected. She said they mustn't lie, that the spirit needs honesty, that a cover-up is a betrayal of faith. Yuna replied that no one needs the faith of a dead spirit. Hana fell silent. Daniel wrote 2 hieroglyphs on the duckweed. They were both right. They looked at the water, then at each other. Yuna snorted. Hana sighed, but they both stayed. The work of disguising themselves took the entire 5th month. Baksu went around the village giving instructions. If a stranger from the city comes, ask about the weather and the price of rice. Don't talk about the spirit. Don't talk about miracles. If asked about the water, say the spring is good. If asked about the harvest, say it's been a rainy year. The villagers listened. Not everyone understood why, but they trusted Boku. For 40 years he had been their shaman. For 40 years he had healed those he could and buried those he couldn't. If he says to keep quiet, it means there's a reason. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his work. The 6th month brought a drought. There had been no rain for 3 weeks, then 4, then 5. The river that fed the upper fields had shrunk to a trickle. The village wells had dropped by 2 meters. The rice was turning yellow. People were getting nervous. Daniel felt the drought like thirst, literally. His lake hadn't dried up. Underground springs kept the water level steady. But everything around him was drying up. The fields were cracking. Trees were shedding their leaves in the middle of summer. The elders said there hadn't been a drought like this in 30 years. Botsu came to the lake at night, alone. He sat down on the platform and quietly asked. He didn't order, he didn't demand, he asked. He said that people were afraid, that if the harvest failed, they would starve in the winter, that he didn't know if the spirit could help, but if it could, the time had come. Daniel knew it could, theoretically. The groundwater beneath the valley flowed in a network. He could feel it like veins beneath the skin, thin streams between layers of clay and stone. If he could redirect one of them, if he could channel the water from beneath the lake through an underground conduit to the parched fields, it was possible. But it meant giving up a part of himself, literally. The water would leave the lake. The water level would drop. He would lose weight. He didn't know how much he would lose. He didn't know how long it would take to recover either. Maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe longer. He made up his mind at dawn. He started slowly. He felt his way along the underground channel running from the lake's eastern shore toward the upper fields. The channel was clogged with clay and roots. Daniel pushed the water like blood through a blocked artery. He pressed. He washed away the blockage. He pushed. It was the hardest work he'd done since waking up. By noon, the first water broke through. A thin trickle emerged from the ground in the middle of the dry field. A farmer who was hoeing the soil at that moment stared at the wet spot at his feet. He called his wife. She called a neighbor. By evening, the whole village was gathered around the wet spot. The water seeped out slowly but didn't stop. Daniel kept pushing and pushing. He widened the channel. By nightfall, it had become a stream, a thin one but enough to water the roots in the 3 nearest plots. The price became clear the next morning. Daniel looked at himself and saw the lake had receded by 1/2 meter. The shores were exposed. The irises on the western side were sticking out of the mud instead of the water. The offering stone that had once stood right at the water's edge was now 3 steps away from it. Minso ran up in the morning and froze. She looked at the exposed bottom, at the dead snails that hadn't managed to escape with the water, at the mud where crucian carp had once splashed about. She didn't cry. She clenched her fists and ran to the village. An hour later, she returned with 4 buckets of water from the well. She began carrying water from the well to the lake, bucket after bucket, a 7-year-old girl with buckets that came up to her knees. Daniel wanted to tell her it was pointless, that 4 buckets wouldn't raise the water level even by a millimeter. But then he felt it. A jeong emanated from every bucket. Not from the water, from the effort, from the fact that a little person was dragging a heavy bucket uphill because the lake had given everything it had, and she wanted to give it back. Boksu saw Minso with the buckets. He didn't say anything. He took his own buckets. He went to fetch water. Hana saw them both. She took the buckets. By noon, there were 7 of them carrying water. By evening, there were 15. No one gave orders. No one explained. People saw that the lake had given its water to their fields and had run dry, and they came to give it back. It made no sense from a hydrological standpoint. Buckets were nothing compared to the volume of the lake. But from the perspective of jeong, it was more powerful than anything Daniel had ever felt before. 30 people carrying water back to the lake because they were grateful, not because they were afraid. Not because they wanted to bargain for something, because the lake was their life, and it was tired, and they wanted to help. Daniel wasn't being restored by the water in the buckets. He was being restored by the jeong in those buckets. A week later, it rained. The water level rose on its own. But Daniel knew that the real cure was the people with the buckets, not the clouds. The drought ended. The harvest survived. But Daniel learned a lesson. He can give, but it comes at a price. His body is the lake, of course, and if he gives too much, he'll cease to exist. He'll simply dry up, and no number of buckets will save it. Yuna was sitting on the shore that night when the rain began. She was looking at the water. Daniel arranged 2 characters for her out of duckweed. "You're right," Yuna asked aloud. "About what?" Daniel wrote some more. "We need strength." Yuna nodded. She said she knew where to get it. Not jeong, not offerings, knowledge. She knows where 2 more spirits live in the mountains, weak ones, almost dead, but alive. If Daniel can connect with them through the groundwater, if they can help each other. A network instead of a lone spirit. Daniel wrote a single word. Tell me. By the 9th month, the hills above the lake began to turn yellow. Autumn came quietly to the Male Gull Valley. The leaves were changing. The nights were growing colder. The morning fog lingered over the water until noon. Daniel felt the season with his whole body. The water was cooling. Biological processes were slowing down. The bacteria he'd been cultivating at the bottom for months were operating at half speed. The irises were preparing for winter dormancy. The snails were burrowing into the mud. The lake was falling asleep. But he couldn't. At night, when the fog lifted, Daniel reached out with his consciousness through the groundwater. Yuna had told him about two spirits. One lived in a mountain spring halfway north, the spirit of the stone by the road. Once upon a time, travelers would leave him coins and pieces of flatbread. Now the road had been abandoned, and the spirit had been silent for 40 years. The second was farther away. On the western slope, in a gorge, the spirit of an old bridge. The bridge had long since rotted away and collapsed. The spirit hung from the remnants of the piles above the void, waiting for something unknown. But Daniel couldn't reach them. The groundwater wasn't flowing that way. There was no connection. He tried for 5 nights in a row. It flowed in thin streams underground. It hit a rock. It turned back. He tried another route. Rock again. On the 6th night, he gave up. He arranged 3 hieroglyphs out of duckweed for Yuna. "I can't get there." Yuna listened. She thought for a moment. She said there was another way. Not through water, through a person. If someone took a jug of water from Tejo and carried it to that spring, poured it directly into the source, then a part of Daniel would end up inside. A tenuous connection, like a thread, but it might be enough. Daniel didn't know if it would work. He didn't know the rules of this world. He didn't know his own limits. Every time he tried something new, it was a shot in the dark. But he had nothing to lose. Yuna left at dawn. 1 jug of water from Tejo, a flask with a silver cap, men's clothing. Hana wanted to go with her. Yuna refused. She said that 2 people attract more attention than 1, and that Hana was needed more here. Hana didn't argue, but her hand trembled in the water that evening, and Daniel held her fingers a little tighter than usual. Yuna returned 4 days later, with an empty jug and a strange look on her face. She'd found a spring. She poured out the water, and something happened. The spring gurgled, once, as if it had coughed. Yuna waited an hour. Nothing else. She left. Daniel closed his eyes, if the lake had eyes. He concentrated. He reached not through the earth, but into himself, toward that single drop that was now in a foreign spring half a day's journey away. And he felt it, faintly, on the edge of perception, like a sound from the next room through a thick wall. Someone was breathing. Someone was alive. Old, tired, almost giving up, but alive. He tried to send a signal, like a ripple, but an internal one. Through that drop, through a connection thinner than a hair. He sent a single word, not as a hieroglyph, but as a sensation. Warmth. Like a Minso flatbread. Like Hana's hand in water. Like the villagers' buckets. Just warmth. Silence. For a long time. Then a reply. Not a word. A tremor. As if an old tree had swayed in a wind that wasn't there. The spirit of the stone by the road heard him. Daniel couldn't speak to it, couldn't help. He could only send warmth through a single drop in a stranger's spring. But that was more than nothing. It was the beginning of a network. But in the 9th month, something more important than the spring and the spirits in the mountains happened. Sogyeon appeared. Daniel had known about the pine tree on the hill above the lake from the very first day. Old, gnarled, cracked bark, half its branches dead, yellow needles. A tree that belonged in a cemetery, not on a hillside. But it stood there, stubbornly, against all odds. Daniel didn't think about it. He had enough to worry about with the lake and the village and the camouflage and the drought. The pine was just a tree. Until one night when it spoke. It wasn't like with people. People speak from the outside, with words, with the vibration of water. The pine spoke from within, through its roots. Its roots reached deep into the earth, and some of them reached the groundwater that fed the lake. Daniel felt a vibration. Low, slow, like a voice from under a rock. Not words, something older than words. A grumble, or a moan, or laughter. He couldn't make it out. He responded in the same way. He sent warmth through the groundwater to the pine tree's roots. Silence. Then the voice became clearer. Now Daniel could make it out. It wasn't a moan or laughter. It was a curse. An old, forgotten curse in a language Daniel didn't know, but whose meaning he understood from the context. Something like a damned young upstart who makes noise at night and keeps people from sleeping. Daniel froze. The pine tree was cursing at him. The next night he tried again. More carefully, more gently. He sent not a greeting, but a question. "Who are you?" The answer came an hour later, a long time by the standards of this conversation. But Daniel was used to waiting. He was a lake. Lakes are patient. The answer wasn't a word. It was an image. Daniel saw her, a woman, an old woman, hunchbacked, dressed in green, with a face like tree bark, with eyes like resin. She was crouching and drinking something from a clay cup. Tea. Strong black tea. And she was cursing at someone invisible. The image vanished. Daniel understood. A spirit lived on the hill above his lake. Not young like him. Ancient. 400 years old if you count by the rings of the pine tree. The first Shin he had ever encountered. And this Shin was drinking tea and cursing. Daniel waited until morning. When the sun had warmed the earth and the pine tree's roots had come slightly to life from the heat, he sent a new signal. Not a question. An offering. Mineral water enriched with potassium and phosphorus. Through the groundwater, straight to the roots. The pine tree must have felt it like a sip of hot tea after a cold night. Silence. An hour. 2. Then an image. The same old woman. Only now she wasn't swearing. She looked straight at him. Through the image. Through the connection. Eyes like pitch. Piercing. Sharp. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said one word. Clearly. Precisely. Through the roots, into the groundwater, into the lake, into his consciousness. Strange. Daniel wanted to reply but didn't have time. The old woman sent more. A whole stream. Not words. Memories. Daniel saw the valley as it had been 150 years ago. Green, alive, full of people, and full of spirits. The spirit of the stream by the bridge, the spirit of the stone at the crossroads, the spirit of the old oak tree beyond the village, the spirit of the well in the square. Dozens of them, and above them all, in the center, a lake. The shining, clear, deep Lake Tahoe. And in it, a woman, young, with hair like a waterfall, with eyes like the mountain sky. Sirdion. Daniel saw her for the first time, and recognized her. Not by her face, not by her name. He recognized her as one recognizes one's own reflection. Something inside him said, yes, it's her. She is a part of you. The image faded. Sogyeon stopped transmitting. She was tired. 400 years, and every word comes to her like a step up a mountain. Daniel lay at the bottom of his lake all night. He didn't move. He didn't clean the water. He didn't check the pH. He thought. Sirdion, the spirit of the lake, sealed in a mirror 120 years ago. A part of her remained in the silt. He was born within those remnants. He is no random spirit. He is her echo, her temporary voice. His engineering knowledge and her ancient power, two sides of the same coin. He didn't know what to do with this knowledge, didn't know what it meant for his future, didn't know if Sirdion was alive in the mirror or if only a memory of her remained in the silt. But he knew one thing. At the bottom of his lake, someone is sleeping. And every offering, every jeong, awakens her just a little. In the morning, Minso came with a flatbread. She placed it on the stone. She said, "Good morning, Ajoshi." Daniel replied with a ripple, a circle, "Good morning." Minso ran off to the school that Hana had opened in the village last week. 3 students, 1 notebook to share among them all. Chalk made from lake limestone. Daniel watched her go through the ripples on the surface and thought that for the sake of this girl and this morning, it had been worth dying in Laos by the well with arsenic. A year had passed. Daniel counted the days by the sunrises he sensed through the light on the surface. 362 sunrises since he woke up. Male goal had changed. Not beyond recognition, subtly. Like the face of a person who had started getting enough sleep and eating their fill. The same features, but the light in her eyes was different. The houses had been repaired. The roofs had been rethatched. In the square in front of the village headman's house, there was a new well. Daniel had cleaned it out and filled it with groundwater. Children were running through the streets, and you could hear them. The village used to be quiet. Sick children don't scream or run around. Now they were screaming and running. 14 children, all healthy. No goiter, no rickets, no parasites. Minso is the loudest among them. She's 8.5. She's grown 3 centimeters in a year. She runs barefoot. Her knees are covered in mud. Her braids come undone by noon. Every morning she's the first one at the offering stone. She washes the stone. She arranges the flowers. She talks to the lake about everything under the sun. Daniel listens and responds with ripples whenever he can. She told him that Tewan, who used to pull her braid, now brings her wildflowers. Daniel replied with 3 circles. Minso asked what it meant. He didn't explain that 3 circles signaled danger. He just joked, for the first time in his life. He arranged duckweed into the character for flower, and then another one next to it. And another. Minso laughed so hard she startled a heron on the far shore. Over the course of this year, Hana had filled 3 notebooks, a compendium of herbs and their uses, a compendium of diseases and symptoms, a compendium of water rituals. She wrote in beautiful, fine handwriting and illustrated the pages with drawings of plants. Every evening she sat by the water, and Daniel dictated to her through the duckweed and her dreams. She asked questions, he answered. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. She would dip her hand into the water, and he would wrap his fingers around hers, and they would remain silent until the fog lifted. These were the best moments of his day. He knew he shouldn't feel this way. He was water. She was human. Nothing could exist between them except what was already there. But every evening she came, and every evening he held her hand. Yuna spent the winter in the valley. She trained the villagers. Don't fight. Keep quiet. How to answer strangers' questions. What to say. What not to say. She conducted inspections. She would come to a random house. She knocked. She introduced herself as a traveler from the city. She asked questions like an inquisitor. Half the villagers failed the test in the first week. After a month, a third failed. After 3 months, everyone answered correctly. The spring is good. It's a rainy year. It's a new variety. There's no spirit. What spirit? We're simple people. Yuna nodded. She didn't smile. But Daniel sensed, through the water touching the soles of her boots, a shadow of relief. Sogyeon spoke with him every night now, in short sessions, 10 to 15 minutes at a time. She couldn't manage any longer. She'd grown weary over 400 years, but she told him a great deal, about Seryeon, about what she was like, kind, strong. She could raise the lake's level by a meter with a single act of will. She could speak to every inhabitant of the valley at once through their dreams. She could heal with the touch of water. A true goddess. Not an engineer pretending to be a spirit, but a spirit in her full power. And yet they sealed her away anyway. 1 inquisitor, 1 mirror, 1 night. Sojun was on the hill and heard the lake screaming. The water was boiling. Fish were floating to the surface, dead. The trees on the shore turned black. And then, silence. In the morning, the lake was dead, black, empty. 120 years. Until Daniel. Sojun told this story without tears. Trees have no tears. But her needles rained down onto the ground that night like yellow rain. Daniel listened and felt an echo inside himself. Not his own, deeper, at the very bottom, where there was silt and darkness and something sleeping. Seryeon stirred in her sleep as Sogyeong spoke of her, as if she could hear. Toward the end of the first year, Cheon arrived. Small, 9 years old, ragged, silent, eyes like an adult's in a child's body. She appeared on the path to the lake at dusk, alone, with no belongings, barefoot. Her feet were bloodied. Minso saw her first. She ran to call Hana. Hana came out to the trail. The girl stood there, not looking at the people. She was looking at the water. She gazed at the lake the way a blind person looks when seeing light for the first time, wide-eyed, eagerly, without blinking. She said she'd been walking through the mountains for 3 weeks, that her mother had died when she was born, that her father had been taken away for debts, that she'd lived with her aunt in the neighboring valley. Her aunt beat her. She left. She walked toward the lake because she could hear it. Hana asked how she could hear it. Jeong said the fish in the stream along the way had told her. Hana and Yuna exchanged glances. Odin, a child born with the gift of sight. Daniel sensed Jeong the moment she stepped into the water to wash her broken feet, and he froze. It wasn't like it was with other people. Minso gave off a bright, hot jeong. Hana gave off a deep, calm jeong. Yuna gave off nothing. Jeong gave off something third. Not jeong, a connection, direct, without a ripple, without a wave, without dreams. She stood in the water, and he could hear her thoughts. Not all of them, just fragments. Tired. It hurts. My legs. It's cold. The water's warm. It feels good. Someone's here. Big. Kind. Hello. Daniel responded to her in the same way. Not with words, a sensation. Hello, little one. Welcome. Jeong smiled. For the first time in 3 weeks. Hana took her in, gave her food, gave her clothes. She gave her a place by the hearth. Jeong ate slowly, like someone who's used to the idea that food could run out at any moment. A week later, she was going to the lake every day with Minso. At first, Minso was jealous. Then she accepted it. They were different. Minso was loud and quick as fire. Jeong was quiet and deep, like a well. Together, they were exactly what the lake needed, a voice and an ear. Jeong began studying with Hana, reading, writing, and identifying herbs. But the most important thing she learned wasn't taught by anyone. She learned to listen to the spirits. Not Daniel's, others. She heard Sogyun on the hill. She heard a faint whisper from the spring where Yuna had poured the water. She heard something at the bottom of the lake, something deep, something sleeping. She didn't yet understand what it was. Daniel didn't tell her. It wasn't time. But he knew that one day she would be the one to tell him what he was afraid to hear. There's someone else inside you. The Inquisitor arrived at the beginning of the 2nd year. Daniel learned of him 3 days later. Not from people, from the water. A traveler crossed the stream at the pass, and Daniel sensed it through his earth connection to that stream. Silver. A taste of silver on the soles of his boots, subtle, cold, unpleasant, like metal on the tongue. Someone carrying silver was heading toward the valley. Daniel sent Box a dream that very night, a short one, clear, a silver boot on a mountain trail. Boxu woke up before dawn. He got dressed. He went to see Hana. He woke Yuna up. By morning, they were ready. Yuna said it was most likely a lone inquisitor, reconnaissance, first contact. They don't come in groups the first time. They come alone. Polite, gentle, with a smile, tea, and stories about the celestial emperor. He stays a week, 2, a month. He watches, listens, sniffs the air. If he finds nothing, he'll leave and write in his report that there's no sign of anything. If he finds something, Yuna didn't finish her sentence. She didn't need to. Namjoon Cho entered male goal at noon. Tall, thin, 35 years old, a pleasant but tired face. Intelligent eyes. He was dressed simply, a gray traveling robe, no silver in plain sight. But Daniel could sense it, through the water in the well from which Namjoon had taken a drink upon entering the village. The silver was hidden, behind his back, under his cloak. A mirror. He was carrying a ceiling mirror. Namjoon introduced himself as a traveling scholar. He said he was studying mountain springs and water quality in remote valleys. The village headman, an elderly farmer named Gonu, received him politely. He gave him a room. He offered him dinner. Namjoon ate with the farmers. He joked. He shared news from the city. He asked about the weather and the price of rice. Not a word about spirits. Not a word about the order. Just a pleasant, educated guest. Yuna watched from inside the Khan's house through a crack in the shutters. She recognized the type. A third-rank inquisitor, a specialist in minor spirits. Dangerous not by strength, but by patience. Such men live in the village for months. They drink tea with the elders. They play with the children. They help repair roofs. And they wait for a single word, a single glance toward the sanctuary, a single child who might say the wrong thing. On the second day, Namjoon asked the village head to show him around the area. Gonu led him through the fields. Namjoon looked at the rice. Thick, green, thick stalks. He asked what variety it was. Gonu answered just as Yuna had taught him. A new variety, brought from the south. A merchant sold it. Namjoon nodded. He jotted it down in his notebook. Then he asked to see the water. Gonu led him to a well in the town square. Namjoon scooped up some water. He held it up to the light. He sniffed it. He took a sip. He said the water was excellent, clean and delicious. He asked where the spring was. Gonu replied that the spring was in the mountains. 3 years ago, they had cleared the stream bed. Namjoon nodded. He wrote it down. Then he asked if there were any other bodies of water nearby. Gonu hesitated for half a second. Namjoon noticed. Daniel was sure he'd noticed. But Gonu managed to get through it. He said there was a lake further down the slope. An old one. Nothing special. People fish there sometimes. Namjoon asked him to show it to him. Gonu couldn't refuse. He led the way. Namjoon stood on the shore of Taiho and looked at the water. Daniel froze. He could feel the Inquisitor through every molecule, a sensation of silver behind his back. Cold, greedy, the mirror wanted him. He felt it like a hunger directed at him. But he didn't move. No ripples, no current, no duckweed. The lake lay still as glass, dead to the eye. Namjoon stood there for a long time. He watched. Then he crouched down. He touched the water with his fingers. Daniel felt his touch and, by an act of will, did not react. He sent no warmth. He sent no cold. Nothing. Just water. Namjoon stood up. He wiped his fingers. He looked at the shrine. A simple wooden pavilion. A roof. A platform. A stone. Dried flowers on the stone. He asked what it was. Gonu said the fishermen had built it. A shelter from the rain. A comfortable place to sit and fish. Namjoon looked at the flowers on the stone. Flowers on a stone in a fisherman's shelter. He said nothing, but Daniel saw his eyes narrow slightly. The Inquisitor noticed. The first clue. Namjoon went into the village. Daniel waited until evening. When it got dark, Hana came down to the water. Daniel wrote with duckweed. He had seen the flowers. Hana nodded. She ran to the rock. She removed the flowers. She washed the rock. In the morning, when Namjoon went down to the lake again, the rock was empty. Just a rock. Nothing sacred. Namjoon looked at it. He touched it. He said nothing. Daniel understood that this wasn't a trick. It was a delay. The Inquisitor wasn't stupid. He had seen the flowers. He had remembered them. And he would wait. A week passed. Namjoon lived in the village as if he belonged there. He helped the village elder repair the fence. He played with the children in the square. He told stories. The children loved him. He knew how to talk to children, gently, cheerfully, without condescension. Minso kept her distance from him. Yuna had taught her. If a strange man asks about the lake, say you're fishing. Nothing more. Minso was stubborn but not stupid. She remained silent. But Namjoon noticed that too. He noticed that one girl, the only one among all the children, didn't approach him. That she ran to the lake every morning. that she came back with wet knees. He didn't ask. He watched. On the 10th day, Namjoon came to the lake alone. In the morning, early. He sat down on the pier. He took out a book. He read. For 3 hours. He just sat there and read. Daniel lay at the bottom, not moving. Not a single duckweed on the surface. Not a ripple. Not a fish by the dock. Dead silence. Namjoon closed the book. He looked at the water. He said aloud, "For a dead lake, this is suspiciously clean." He stood up. He walked away. Daniel realized that time was running out. The Inquisitor was clever, patient, attentive. He wasn't in a hurry. But he wouldn't leave until he found the answer. Yes or no. A spirit or not a spirit. And every day in the village gives him new clues. Clear water, healthy children, bountiful rice. A sanctuary that no one calls a sanctuary. A girl who runs to the lake every morning. Too many coincidences for one poor village. Yuna came to the lake at night. She said they needed a plan, not a cover-up, a countermeasure. Something that would make Namjoon doubt his own observations, or something that would make him leave. Daniel thought about it all night. By dawn, he had an idea, a terrifying one, an unpleasant one, but perhaps the only one. He wrote a note for Yuna on a duckweed leaf. "I need to lie to him." Yuna looked at the characters, for a long time. Then she asked how. Daniel wrote, "Through a dream." Yuna nodded. She said she understood, and that it would change him. Daniel knew. The lie turned out to be easier than the truth. Daniel waited until 3 in the morning after making his decision. Not because he was preparing, because he was putting it off. He knew this was a turning point, that after this, he would become a different person. Spirits don't lie. Sojun told him that during the first month of their conversations. The dreams a spirit sends to a person are a bridge. If the bridge is built on lies, it will collapse. Not a metaphor, literally. A false dream destroys the connection between the spirit and the sleeper. Forever. Daniel would never be able to send Namjoon another dream after that. One shot. He had to hit the mark. He chose the image carefully. Not a lie in its purest form, a half-truth. Worse. He sent Namjoon a dream in which the lake was dead. Black water, rotten mud, dead fish. Not a single living root. Emptiness, cold, silence. Everything the lake had been before his arrival. This isn't a lie. It's the past. The lake really was like that, a year ago. But Daniel presented it as the present, as the essence. That's what's here. Dead water and nothing more. The dream slipped into Namjoon like a knife through butter. Daniel sensed it. Ease. The Inquisitor slept without protection, without the prayer shields that the Order's priests set up at night. He hadn't expected an attack, or he hadn't considered this place dangerous enough to defend himself. Or Daniel didn't want to think about it. Or Namjoon subconsciously wanted the spirit to be absent. He wanted to leave with a clean report. He wanted everything in this valley to be explained by the spring and a new variety of rice. The lie fell on fertile ground. In the morning, Namjoon looked calmer, more at ease, like a man who had dreamed up the answer to a question that had been tormenting him. He went down to the lake. He looked at the water, and Daniel saw that his eyes had changed. Before, there had been suspicion. Now, there was something else. Relief. Namjoon sat down on the platform. He took out a notebook. He wrote. For a long time. Daniel couldn't read it, but he guessed. A report. A preliminary one. The Inquisitor had reached a conclusion, or was almost there. But Daniel had paid the price. The cost of the lie came immediately. Not as pain, not as weakness, as murk. The water at the bottom of the lake had grown murky. A thin layer, almost invisible. But Daniel felt it like dirt under his fingernails. Like a stain on a clean shirt. He had lied. And the lake remembered. For 2 days he cleaned out that murk. He filtered the water through irises. He precipitated the particles with clay. He worked like a man possessed. By the 3rd day, the water was clear again, but it remained inside him. The knowledge that he was capable of this, that he had made a choice, and that choice was dirty. Hana sensed it. That evening, when she dipped her hand into the water, she pulled her fingers back. She looked at the lake. She said that the water was different, bitter. Daniel didn't answer. Hana sat on the dock and waited. He was silent. She dipped her hand in again, slowly, carefully. He touched her fingers, and she understood. Not with words, through the water. She sensed what he had done. She pulled her hand away, stood up, walked away, didn't say a word. Daniel lay at the bottom and wanted to die. Again, for real. To dissolve, to cease to be. But he couldn't. Because in the morning, Minso would bring a flatbread and say, "Good morning, Ahoshi," and he'd have to answer. Hana hadn't come for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she came. She sat on the platform. She lowered her hand. Daniel didn't move. He waited. She spoke. Quietly. She said she understood. That he was protecting all of them. That lying to the Inquisitor wasn't betrayal, but a tactic. But that she wished he'd told her beforehand. That they were in this together. That decisions were made together. Daniel arranged 3 hieroglyphs out of duckweed. "You're right. I'm sorry." Hana brushed the duckweed aside with her hand. She took out a notebook and said that from that day on she would write everything down, including her mistakes. Daniel didn't object. Namjoon stayed in the village for another 2 weeks after the false dream. But his behavior had changed. He stopped going to the lake. He stopped asking questions about the water. He walked around the neighborhood. He helped the villagers. He spoke of the heavenly emperor, but gently, without pressure, like a man fulfilling a duty rather than a mission. Yuna watched and remained on guard. She said that's what inquisitors do. They retreat. They wait. Then they strike. But Daniel sensed something else. Through the water in the well from which Namjoon drank every day. The Inquisitor was tired. Not physically, internally. Something inside him had broken, or perhaps it had always been broken. Daniel sensed it like a fine crack in stone. Namjoon believed in his cause, but that belief had cost him dearly. Every sealed spirit, every village left dead after sealing, every stream that had dried up. He carried it all inside him, and male goal was more than just a mission to him, it was a test. If there was no spirit here, then the world could manage without spirits. That meant the order was right. That meant it wasn't all in vain. A false dream had given him that answer, and he wanted to believe it. During the last week, something happened that no one expected. Eri arrived. The daughter of the merchant Yun from the city of Sanchon. 19 years old, a silk dress, patent leather shoes, 2 servants, a pack donkey laden with bundles. She walked into male goal as one might walk into a shop, with the intention of buying. Eri Yun was beautiful, objectively beautiful. Her face was like those porcelain dolls Daniel had seen in Korean stores in Seattle in his past life. Her skin was white, her eyes were black. Her posture was straight. She spoke with the accent of the educated city folk, clear, quick, to the point. She'd come because she'd heard about the water, about the rice, about healthy children, and she saw an opportunity. Blessed water, bottles, delivery throughout the archipelago, contracts, profits. She already had a business plan ready, written on silk paper in beautiful handwriting. 3 pages, charts, calculations, margins. She came to the lake and laid out her papers right on the sanctuary's platform. Daniel watched from the bottom, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. Hana stood nearby, her face set in stone. Minso hid behind her back and stared at the silk dress with the unabashed envy of an 8-year-old child. Yuna sat on the shore, cleaning her nails with a knife. She didn't interfere. She waited. Eri spoke for 20 minutes about the market, about demand, about logistics, about how water from a clear mountain lake could be sold for triple the price in cities where the water was murky and stank, about how the village would strike it rich, about partnership. She never once mentioned the word spirit. Not once did she bow to the water. Not once did she place an offering on the stone. She had come to do business. And Daniel sensed the same murkiness from her presence as he had from Dox's sack a year ago, only stronger. Because Eri was smarter than Dox. Her calculation was deeper, colder, more professional. She didn't want to buy luck. She wanted to buy the source of luck. Daniel wrote a single character with a duckweed stem, a large one, on the water. No. Eri saw it. She froze. The papers fell from the platform into the water. She stared at the character blurring across the surface, and the expressions on her face changed so quickly that Daniel couldn't keep up. Shock, fear, understanding, and something else, something he hadn't expected to see. Pain. Instantaneous, like a flash, as if someone had struck the wound she'd been hiding. She'd been rejected. Again. She was used to it, but she hadn't expected the lake to reject her. Eri gathered up the wet papers. She stood up, turned around, walked past Hana without looking, past Minso, past Yuna. She went into the village. Daniel expected her to leave. She didn't leave. In the morning, she sat at the edge of the village by the well and looked at the mountains. Without servants, without silk papers, in a simple traveling dress, Daniel could sense her through the water in the well. Anger, resentment, stubbornness, and beneath it all, deep down, so deep that she probably didn't even know it herself, loneliness. Daniel recognized that feeling. He felt it every night as he lay at the bottom of the lake and remembered that he had neither hands, nor a face, nor a voice. Eri stayed in the village. Namjoon left 3 days after her arrival, quietly, without goodbyes. He left the village elder a note thanking him for his hospitality. Not a word about the order, not a word about the spirits. Daniel guided him through the groundwater to the pass. He felt the silver of the mirror behind him receding. The cold was fading. Quieter, quieter, gone. Yuna didn't relax. She said he would return. Maybe in a month, maybe in half a year, but he would return. Inquisitors always return. Daniel knew she was right. But now, at this very moment, there was no silver in the valley, and it was possible to breathe. Daniel sent Namjoon a false dream showing the lake as dead and paid for it with murky water and a falling out with Hana. Namjoon believed it, but Yuna warned that he would return. Eri, the merchant's daughter, arrived with a plan to sell water, and Daniel refused her with a character written on a slip of paper. Eri stayed in the village while Namjoon left with a preliminary report stating that there was no spirit. Eri didn't leave, and this angered Hana more than the Inquisitor's visit. The merchant's daughter settled into an empty house on the edge of the village. She paid the village head a month's rent in advance. She dismissed her servants. She remained alone. Every morning she went out to the well. She drew water. She carried it into the house. She cooked for herself, clumsily, not skillfully. The rice burned, the beans turned to mush. But she cooked. The villagers looked at her with the same expression they use when looking at a city dweller who's picked up a hoe for the first time, a mixture of pity and curiosity. Daniel watched her through the water in the well. He could feel how, every day, her anger subsided just a little. How her stubbornness grew stronger. How her loneliness wouldn't go away. A week later, Eri came to the lake. Not with the papers, with nothing. She stood on the shore. She stared at the water for a long time. Then she said she wouldn't leave, that she had nowhere to go, that her father had sent her here not for business but to get rid of her for the summer. That back home he had already signed a contract arranging her marriage to the son of a fabric merchant. The groom was 20 years older, with 3 concubines. To him, Eri wasn't a wife but a seal on a business alliance between 2 houses. She said this in an even voice, without tears, as if reporting on someone else's affairs. Daniel listened and felt the quality of her presence shifting. The murkiness was fading. Not entirely, but beneath the calculation and business acumen, a human being emerged. Frightened, angry at the whole world, but a human being. He didn't write anything on the duckweed. He simply sent a warm current to her feet, light, like a touch. Eri looked down. She looked at the water. She said nothing. She left. The next day, she went to Hana and asked how she could help. Hana looked at her for a long time. Then she said that pilgrims from neighboring villages were causing problems. They came whenever they wanted. They crowded the shore. They trampled the grass. They scared the fish. They fought over a spot by the offering stone. Someone was needed to organize it all. A schedule, order, a line. Eri listened, and something lit up in her eyes that Daniel recognized instantly. Enthusiasm. Not for business, for organizing. 3 days later, a wooden post with a schedule stood by the trail leading to the lake. Maisel Gol mornings were for the villagers. Noon was for pilgrims from nearby villages. Evening hours are closed. No more than 3 offerings per visit. Time at the stone is limited to no more than half an hour per family. Children skip the line. The sick skip the line. Eri stood by the post with the air of a trading house manager and directed the flow of people with an efficiency that Daniel had only seen at well-organized construction sites in Bangladesh. Hana watched this from the platform, and the expression on her face slowly shifted from irritation to reluctant respect. Minso approached Eri after her first day of work. She looked up at her. She said Eri had a pretty dress. Eri looked down at her. She said Minso's knees were dirty. Minso replied that her knees were dirty because she was working. Eri fell silent. Then she crouched down and said she wanted to work too. Minso nodded. She handed her a rag. Together they washed the offering stone that evening. Daniel watched and felt warmth radiating across the lake from that small moment. Not jeong. Something simpler. 2 people who decided to be together. At the same time, tensions with the neighboring villages were mounting. The village of Hwasong, beyond the pass, sent a delegation. 5 men. Strong men. With clubs. Not for fighting. To demonstrate their seriousness. They said that the water of Taeho belonged to everyone. That Ma Il-gol had no right to restrict access. That their children were getting sick too. That their wells were murky as well. And that if Ma Il-gol wouldn't share, they'd take it themselves. Village chief Gonu was frightened. Baksu was angry. Yuna said it was predictable. Hana suggested negotiations. Eri proposed a contract. Daniel proposed something else. A month earlier, he'd learned from Yuna where the Hwasong village well was located. Far from his lake. But the groundwater stretched in that direction like a thin stream. For 2 weeks, Daniel made his way along that stream. Drop by drop. Millimeter by millimeter. At night, when his strength was at its limit, he made it. He sensed the Hwasong well. The water in it was disgusting, rusty, full of iron, almost undrinkable. Daniel couldn't purify it completely. Too far away, the connection was too weak. But he could do one thing: stimulate the growth of the roots of certain plants around the well. Slowly, imperceptibly. Through the groundwater, he would send the spores of the same mycorrhizal fungi that had worked in the fields of Ma Il-gol. In a month, the water in the Hwasong well would be slightly cleaner. In 2 months, noticeably cleaner. In half a year, it would be safe to drink. Not perfect, but enough. By the time the delegation from Hwasong arrived with their clubs, their own well had already beginning to change. They just didn't know it yet. Daniel wrote a note on a duckweed leaf for Hana. Tell them to go home and check the water in a month. Hana passed on the message. The people of Hwasong didn't believe her, but they left. A month later, they returned, without clubs, with offerings. Their well had become cleaner. They didn't understand how, but they understood where it came from. Before they had a chance to bow to the lake, Eri met them at the signpost with the schedule and politely explained the visiting procedures. The Hwasong people looked at the 19-year-old girl in a simple dress, who was commanding them like a general, and didn't know what to say. Ari held their gaze without blinking. Daniel realized she had found her place. A year and a half. 18 months since the day a barefoot girl placed a misshapen flatbread on a rock by the Black Lake. Daniel had grown stronger, much stronger. Jeong was now walking not only from Mayulgol, from Hwason, from the 2 villages to the south where the rumors had reached and from which the pilgrims had come. From the lone old hermit who lived in a cave on the western slope and bowed toward the lake every morning, though he had never seen it. Every offering, every bow, every quiet thank you spoken over a jug of water made him broader, deeper, more precise. He could now move currents throughout the entire lake simultaneously. He could create ripples so subtle that they formed entire sentences in a minute. He could send dreams not to 1 but to 3 people in a single night. It could sense groundwater 3 days' journey away. It could diagnose a person's illness the moment it touched the water. And yet it could not go beyond the limits of its own water. Not a single step, not a single drop. Bound, forever. Sogyeon spoke to it every night. Her pine tree had come to life. New needles on the branches for the first time in 80 years. The bark had healed its cracks. The roots had strengthened. It looked younger, if one can say that about a tree. In the visions she transmitted, she increasingly appeared as a young girl with tar-colored hair rather than a hunched-over old woman. She flirted with Daniel crudely and unceremoniously. She called him a boy. She said he thought too much for a spirit. Daniel brushed it off with a joke. He sent her potassium to her roots. She grumbled that he was trying to bribe her. There was a closeness between them that Daniel couldn't describe in human words. 2 beings bound to a single place. 2 consciousnesses locked within the tree and the water. They understood each other without explanation. One night, Sogyeong told him a truth he didn't want to hear. She said she loved Seryeon. Not as a friend, not as a neighbor. She loved her the way a tree loves water, with her roots, with everything she had. 400 years side by side. And when Seryeon was taken away, she nearly died. Her needles fell off in a single night. She stood naked on the hill for 120 years, waiting. Now she senses Seryeon within him, within Daniel, deep down. And she doesn't know whom she loves, him or her echo within him. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he sent her neither a word nor an image. He sent what he himself felt, a mixture of tenderness, honesty, and sadness. She accepted it. She fell silent. Her needles rustled that night, even though there was no wind. Chae-yun was growing up fast. In the 6 months she'd been in the valley, she'd gone from a ragged, silent orphan to a serious girl with a piercing gaze and a quiet voice that everyone could hear. Hana taught her to read and write and to identify herbs. But the most important thing Chae-yun was learning didn't come from Hana. She was learning to listen to the world. The fish in the lake told her where the water was warmer. The birds on the shore told her when it would rain. The worms in the soil told her which part of the field was more fertile. Sojun spoke to her directly. No groundwater, no roots, just like that. Like a grandmother and her granddaughter. Chae-yun sat under a pine tree and listened to stories that were 400 years old. And one evening, at the end of the 18th month, Chae-yun came to the lake alone, without Minso, without Hana. She stood on the platform, she looked at the water, and she said what Daniel had been waiting for and fearing ever since he first felt a stirring at the bottom. Spirit, there's someone else inside you. Daniel froze. The water in the lake stood still. No ripples, no current. Absolute calm. Chae-yun wasn't afraid. She sat down on the platform, dangled her legs in the water, and described what she felt. Deep at the bottom, beneath the silt, beneath his consciousness, something enormous, warm, sleeping. It breathes, slowly, 1 breath every few days. It dreams. Chae-yun hears fragments of these dreams. Water, clear water, people on the shore, laughter, bells, and a name, one name, over and over, Tae-ho. Daniel asked the duckweed, Do you know who that is? Chaeyeon shook her head. Then she nodded. She said that So-gyung had told her that it was rryeong, that she wasn't dead, that she's sleeping, and that every offering, every jeong, wakes her up just a little bit. Daniel wrote, "What should I do?" Chaeyeong looked at him, a 9-year-old girl with eyes too mature for her face. She said she didn't know, but that rryeong is waking up. Not now, not tomorrow, but soon. In a year, maybe in 2, and when she wakes up. Chaeyeong fell silent. Daniel finished her thought. In his mind, when she wakes up, she'll need a place, and that place is taken by me. Namjoon returned. Yuna was right. 6 months after the first visit, at the beginning of the 3rd year, and he wasn't alone. The senior inquisitor was with him. Daniel sensed them 2 days earlier. 2 silver trails on the mountain path. One familiar, cold, Namjoon. The second, unfamiliar, heavier, denser. Silver not just on his back, all over his body, on his belt, on his wrists, around his neck. A combat inquisitor. Yuna turned pale when Daniel described to her through the duckweed what he was sensing. She said that a combat inquisitor was a 2nd-rank position. His mirror wasn't for sealing, it's for destruction. It doesn't capture the spirit, it sucks it out, like a leech. The spirit simply ceases to exist. No ceiling, no mirror with a captive. Emptiness. The valley was preparing, quietly, without panic. Yuna gathered everyone by the lake at night. Baksu, Hana, Eri. Minso wasn't invited, but she came on her own, and no one dared to send her away. Chaeyeong sat on the platform and remained silent. Yuna spoke. She explained what was going to happen. The inquisitors would come. They would live in the village. They would conduct inspections. But now they had a combat mirror with them. So someone higher up didn't believe Namjoon's first report. Someone decided to check it out personally. That's bad, but not hopeless. A combat inquisitor works differently. He doesn't need evidence. He needs provocation. He'll apply pressure, insult the locals, destroy shrines, trample offerings, wait for the spirit to reveal itself in response to the aggression. If the spirit reveals itself, the mirror will activate instantly. So, Yuna looked at the water. That means the spirit must not react to anything, in any way. Daniel wrote in duckweed. I understood. They left 2 days later. Namjoon led the way. Behind him was a man Daniel could describe in a single word: sharp. A sharp face, sharp shoulders, sharp movements. The silver he wore jingled with every step. His name was Jinho, senior inquisitor of the 3rd temple. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. He didn't help fix the fences. He walked through the village without looking around, straight to the lake. He stood on the shore. He looked at the water, and Daniel sensed the mirror. Not behind him, on his belt. Open, focused, hungry. It pulled at him, like a whirlpool, like a hole in the world. Daniel wanted to scream, to recoil, to sink to the bottom, to hide. He didn't move. Not a ripple. Not a current. Dead water. Jinho stood on the shore for an hour. Then he turned and walked away. Namjoon stayed behind. He stood there, staring at the lake. His face bore an expression Daniel had never seen before. Agony. Namjoon didn't want to go back. He didn't want to bring Jinho back. But an order is an order. The siege began. Jinho acted exactly as Yuna had predicted. On the 2nd day, he entered the sanctuary. He looked at the offering stone. He swept the flowers onto the floor of the platform. With his foot. Minso stood nearby. Her eyes grew wide. She opened her mouth to scream. Hana covered her mouth with her hand. She pulled her close. Minso struggled. Hana held her tight. Daniel lay at the bottom and felt the water boiling with rage inside him. Literally. The temperature at the bottom rose by 2 degrees per second. He stopped himself. He brought the temperature back down. He clenched all his willpower into a fist he didn't have. Don't react. Don't react. Don't react. On the 3rd day, Jinho broke one of the sanctuary's supports. He just kicked it with his foot. The wood cracked. The roof tilted. The villagers watched. Boksu stood on the path, his hands shaking. Yuna stood next to him, holding his elbow. She wouldn't let him approach. Daniel said nothing. On the 5th day, Jinho poured a bucket of slop into the lake, dirty water from washing clothes, mixed with lye and ash, straight from the platform, right into the center of the lake. Daniel felt it like a blow to the face. The filth spread across the surface. The lye scorched the duckweed. The fish darted in all directions. He wanted to make a splash. He wanted to throw the filth back. He wanted to. But he didn't move. On the 7th day, something happened that no one had planned. The villagers gathered. Not at night, in the morning, out in the open. 42 people. Everyone who could walk. They stood between the lake and Jinho. Silently. Without weapons. Without clubs. They simply stood there. The elders in front, women and children behind them, men on either side. Minso in the front row, between Grandfather Boksu and his wife. Daniel hadn't asked them to come. Hannah hadn't asked. Yuna hadn't asked. They came on their own. Because the Inquisitor had destroyed their sanctuary. He'd poured filth into their lake. He'd swept away their flowers. And they decided enough was enough. Not with words, not with a meeting. They simply got up one morning and set out. Because their children are healthy. Because their rice is growing. Because their mothers are alive. And they know why. Jinho stood before a group of 42 people, and for the first time, his sharp face lost its confidence. He could seal a spirit. He could destroy it. But he could not destroy 42 people. There was no such order. There was no such mirror. He stood and watched. The people stood and watched. The silence lingered. Namjoon stood behind Jinho, and Daniel could see through the water on his boots that the Inquisitor was crying, quietly, soundlessly. Tears fell to the ground, and Daniel could feel them through the damp earth. Salty, bitter, alive. Jinho turned around. He left. He gathered his things. He left the valley before noon. Namjoon stayed. Namjoon didn't leave for 3 days. He stayed with the village headman. He ate with the villagers. He said nothing. On the 4th night, he went down to the lake, alone, without the mirror, in simple clothes, without the silver. He sat down on the rickety platform. He looked at the water. Daniel lay at the bottom, looking up at him, through 7 meters of water and moonlight. Namjoon was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, quietly, not like an inquisitor, like a human being. He said he knew, that he had known since his first visit, that water isn't naturally that clear on its own, that the children aren't recovering because of the spring, that the rice doesn't yield twice as much just because it's a new variety. He knew, and he wrote in his report that there was no spirit, because he wanted it to be true. Because if there is a spirit, then the order is wrong. And if the order is wrong, then everything Namjoon had done for 12 years, all the sealed spirits, all the dead streams, was for nothing. He couldn't accept that. It was easier to believe a false dream. It was easier to write that there was no spirit. Then an order came from the capital. Re-examine the site, with a combat inquisitor. Namjoon couldn't refuse. He brought Jinho along. He hoped Jinho wouldn't find anything and would leave. Jinho found nothing, but he destroyed the sanctuary. He poured out the mud, and 42 people stood as a wall. And Namjoon understood, not with his mind, with his body. There it was, the truth, standing barefoot on the wet ground, holding the hands of children and the elderly, and unafraid of silver, because what the spirit had given them was more precious than fear. Namjoon fell silent. He looked at the water. He said what Daniel hadn't expected. If you're there, give me a sign, one I won't have to write in my report. Daniel thought, for a minute, 2, 5. He could have created a ripple, could have formed a character, could have sent a warm current, Namjoon could have chalked up any of these signs to the wind, the current, or fatigue. But Daniel did something else. He reached down to the very bottom, to where the silt and darkness lay, to where, a year ago, the shaman Baksu had placed his bronze bell on the offering stone, and the bell had rolled into the water and sunk. Daniel had kept it. Not on purpose, he just felt it in the silt as a warm spot. Grandfather Baksu's bell, the old man's only valuable possession. It had hung around his neck for 40 years. Daniel didn't know the bell's history. He didn't know whose it had been before Baksu. He didn't know that 20 years ago, a young village priest had died in these mountains, and that an old shaman had found his bell and carried it around, not knowing whose it was. He didn't know that the priest's name was Cho, like Namjoon's father. Daniel didn't know any of this. He simply picked up the bell, slowly, from the bottom, through 7 meters of silt and water, carried by a gentle current, minute by minute. The bell rose to the surface. It rose. It swayed in the water like a slow bubble. It came to the surface, quietly, without a splash. Daniel nudged it toward the shore, toward Namjoon's feet. The bronze bell rolled out of the water onto the wet ground. It tinkled. Once. Muffled. Wet. Clear. The sound carried through the valley at night. Namjoon looked down. He saw the bell. His face changed. Slowly, like dawn changing the sky. First, confusion. Then recognition. Then shock. Then, he picked up the bell with both hands. The bronze was warm from Daniel's water. Namjoon brought it to his face. He closed his eyes. He pressed it to his forehead. His shoulders shook. He was crying. Daniel didn't understand why. He only sensed that the bell meant something to this man, something greater than words, greater than reports, greater than the order. Namjoon cried for a long time. Then he stood up. He put the bell around his neck, over his clothes, out in the open. He bowed to the water, deeply, to his waist, the way one bows to an elder, the way one bows to a father. He straightened up. He looked at the lake, and Daniel saw his eyes, wet, red, alive, alive for the first time. Namjoon turned and walked away. At dawn, he was gone from the village. A month later, Hana received a copy of the report. She read it aloud by the lake. There's no spirit in the Malgol Valley. The water is clean thanks to the diligence of the peasants. I recommend lowering the tithe. Hana finished reading and began to cry. Minso asked what had happened. Daniel replied with a ripple. One word. Winter is over. Minso didn't understand. Daniel didn't expect her to understand. She's 8 years old. She has many winters ahead of her. But this first one is over. And for the first time ever, something stirred at the bottom of the lake. Deep, strong, warm. Not a stir, movement, like a turn in a dream, like a breath. Daniel felt it and froze. A voice, inside his own voice, a stranger's, ancient, soft as river clay and strong as a mountain stream. One word. Hello, little one. 2 years and 7 months. Daniel counted the days out of habit, though he had long since stopped thinking of time as a human does. For the spirit, time is not hours and minutes. It is seasons, harvests, offerings, children growing up. Minso is 10 years old. She's a head taller than she was 2 years ago. Her braids reach her waist. Her knees are still covered in mud. Every morning at the offering stone. Every morning. Good morning, Ajosi. She's the only one who calls him that. To everyone else, he's the spirit of Teho. To the villagers, Teho Nim. To Hana, simply a silent presence in the water toward which she reaches out her hand every evening. To Yuna, an ally. To Sojon on the hill, something between a grandson and a lost love. To Cheon, he is a teacher. For Eri, he is a mystery she has stopped trying to unravel and has accepted as it is. For Boksu, he is a god, simple and real, like the rain. Over the course of 3 years, what Daniel mentally referred to as an ecosystem had grown around the lake. Not a biological one, though it was that as well. A human one. Hana ran a school at the sanctuary. 12 students, not just from Mailgol, from Hwason, from villages further south. The children came to learn to read and write and to identify herbs. Hana taught them using her 7 notebooks, the sacred texts of the spirit of Teho. That's what she called the bioremediation formulas and solubility tables, translated into the language of rites and rituals. Eri had established the system. Pilgrims arrived on schedule. Offerings were accepted in order. The sick were seen without waiting in line. Water in jugs was brought out and distributed fairly. The merchant's daughter found her calling in turning chaos into order. She no longer wore silk, a simple dress, her hair tied back, her hands in the earth. Yuna became a wall, invisible, indispensable. She trained 2 people in every village, observers, those who would spot a stranger before the stranger noticed anything important. An early warning network, simple, effective, like everything Yuna did. Chiyun became a bridge between spirits and people, between Daniel and So-gyung, between the lake and that faint spirit of stone in a distant spring, which over these months had grown strong enough to send images to Daniel. Blurred, unclear, but alive. Chae-young heard them all and translated them, a 10-year-old translator of a language not found in dictionaries. Boksu had aged 3 years, or perhaps he had simply revealed his true age. He was over 70. His knees ached. His back wouldn't straighten. But every morning he walked to the lake. Every morning he would bow. Every morning he would speak to the water. Daniel treated him as best he could. Minerals for his joints, anti-inflammatory compounds in the water the old man used to wash his feet. But time is time. Not even the spirit can stop it. Daniel knew Boku didn't have much time left, a year, maybe 2, and that knowledge gnawed at him from within, just as rust gnaws at iron at the bottom of the lake. Siryeon was waking up, slowly, like a glacier melting in spring. Every day, Daniel sensed her a little more clearly. First, her voice, then images, then whole memories that weren't his. She remembered the valley when thousands of people and dozens of spirits lived here. She remembered the festivals on the shore. She remembered how the children would jump into the lake in the summer and she would catch them in gentle currents and toss them up into the air, and they would squeal with delight. She remembered the first snow of every year. She remembered the names of people who had died 200 years ago. She remembered how the first inquisitor came with a mirror and she didn't believe that anyone could harm her. She didn't believe it until the very last second, when the silver touched the water, when the cold entered her, when she was torn in half. One part was sucked into the mirror. The other part had become too deeply embedded in the mud and water and stones and remained there. A fragment, a shard, sleeping at the bottom for 120 years. Some reason he didn't come. The engineer from Seattle, who died with the right final thought. Memories came in waves. Sometimes Daniel couldn't tell his thoughts from hers. Sometimes, in the middle of calculating the magnesium concentration in the water, he would suddenly see the face of a girl who had lived here 200 years ago and had brought the first offering to the lake back then. The girl looked like Minso, or perhaps Minso looked like her. Or maybe all girls with crooked flatbreads look alike. His and her memories intertwined, like 2 streams in a single channel. Sojun sensed this from the hill. One night she told him, "She's almost here." Daniel replied, "I know." Sojun asked, "Are you afraid?" Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he answered honestly, "Yes." He was afraid. Not of death, he'd already died once. He was afraid of disappearing. If Sedion were to fully awaken, she would need a place. There was only one lake. 2 spirits cannot live in the same body of water. Sogin said this bluntly, without mincing words. 400 years don't teach tact. They teach the truth. Either Daniel would stay and Sedion would continue to sleep, or Sedion would wake up and Daniel would dissolve. He would become part of the lake without consciousness. Water that doesn't remember it was once an engineer from Seattle. Or, Sogin fell silent. Daniel waited. Or a third path, an ancient one, a forgotten one. When two spirits in one place do not fight but merge, neither absorbs the other. Both become something new. Neither Daniel nor Sedion, a third entity, with engineering knowledge and ancient power, with his memory and her memory, with his care and her strength. But that means Daniel Shin will cease to exist, as a separate self, as a voice that thinks in English and calculates pH and remembers Seattle and morning coffee and his ex-wife's face and the lab at the University of Washington. This isn't death, it's a transformation. But for the one inside, the difference is slight. Daniel had been thinking about this for 3 months, every night, between counting bacteria and minerals, between the dreams he sent to Box and conversations with Hana through duckweed, between holding her fingers in the water and listening to Minso's cheerful good morning. He couldn't decide. He didn't want to decide. He put it off. He found reasons to wait. Another month. Another harvest. One more winter. The decision didn't come at night in the silence, not in a conversation with Sojun, not in a philosophical epiphany. It came in the morning, on an ordinary day. Minso ran up to the offering stone. She placed a flatbread on it. She said good morning to Ajosi. And she added that yesterday she'd gone to Hwasun with Eri and that there was a little boy there who was sick. Yellow skin, a swollen belly. Just like that 3-year-old her grandmother had brought 2 years ago. Minso asked if Ajosi could help. Daniel reached out toward Hwasun through the groundwater. As usual, just as a hand reaches for a cup. He reached out. He sensed the well, and realized he couldn't. It was too far away. The connection was too weak. He could barely purify the water. He could encourage the growth of the necessary plants around the well, but to diagnose a child from such a distance, to sense his liver, his bile ducts, his blood, he couldn't. His limits wouldn't let him. And in the neighboring valley beyond Hwasun, there was another village, and another, and another. Dozens of villages where children were sick, the water was murky, and the rice was turning yellow. He couldn't reach them. He lacked the power. But Sirdion had that power. She could sense water a day's journey away. She could heal through the rain. She could speak to every stream in the valley at once. Sogyeon had told him. In her prime, Sirdion purified the water throughout the entire archipelago. Not personally. Through a network of spirits that were connected to her just as streams are connected to a river. If only she would wake up. If only her power could merge with his knowledge. Not just bioremediation in a single lake. A purification ecosystem spanning hundreds of kilometers. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria in every stream. Mycorrhizae in every field. Minerals in every well. Thousands of children instead of 14. Daniel looked at Minso through the ripples on the surface. A 10-year-old girl with dirty knees, the very same one who 3 years ago had brought him a lopsided flatbread and brought him back to life. She was waiting for an answer. She believed that Ajosi would help, because Ajosi always helped. He answered with a ripple. A circle. Yes, I'll help. And he knew it was true, just not the way she thought. He began to prepare, quietly, methodically, like an engineer preparing a project for handover, like handing over duties before leaving a job. Every evening he told Hana everything he knew through the duckweed, not in bits and pieces, systematically, section by section. Water purification, phytofiltration, mineral balance, diagnostics through water, medicinal decoctions and their biochemistry, agronomy, soil science. Everything he remembered from university, everything he'd discovered over 3 years in the lake, everything he'd learned from Sarion through her memories. Hana wrote without stopping, her fingers stained with ink, her eyes red from sleeplessness. She didn't ask why. She just felt it. She had always sensed him through the water better than anyone else. There were now 7 notebooks. A complete library, the body of knowledge of a 21st century engineer translated into the language of the sacred texts of the world of Shin. If these notebooks were to spread throughout the archipelago, if the priestesses in other valleys were to read and understand them, the water would become cleaner everywhere, even without the spirit. Because knowledge isn't tied to the lake. Knowledge is free. Every morning he talked with Minso, not about anything important, about the kids that had grown into goats, about Taehwan, who no longer tugged at her braids but carried flowers and blushed, about how beautiful the clouds were today, about how the catfish in the lake had grown so fat that Daniel suspected it was eating the offerings at night. Minso laughed heartily. Daniel memorized it all, every word, every laugh, every "Good morning, Ajosi." He knew that the new being that would come after him would remember this, but remembering doesn't mean feeling. He felt it, right now. This specific version of himself, the engineer from Seattle who died by a well in Laos and was reborn in a black lake at the edge of the world. He sent Box a final dream, a long one, a detailed one. In it, he showed the old man everything. Who he was, where he came from, that he had been a man in another world, that he had built wells and purified water, and died because he had leaned too close to a well contaminated with arsenic. That he hadn't ended up here by accident, that he had come to love this valley and these people. What he was going to do. Boku woke up at dawn. He went to the lake. He sat down on the repaired platform. The villagers had fixed it after Jinho broke the support. The new support was thicker than the old one, made of a double log so it wouldn't get broken again. Boksu sat there in silence for a long time. The fog rose from the water and wrapped around him like a shawl. Then he spoke, quietly. He said he understood, that he'd waited 40 years for the spirit and thought that when the time came, he'd be happy for the rest of his life. He'd been happy for 3 years. That was enough. It was more than the old shaman from the forgotten village deserved. He said that the spirit had the eyes of an engineer, the hands of a god, and the heart of a simple man, and that he couldn't have imagined a better god even if he'd made one up himself. He took a bell from his belt. It was bronze. New. He'd bought it from a merchant a year ago in exchange for the one he'd given to the lake, the one Daniel had later retrieved from the bottom for Namjoon. He placed it on the offering stone. He said thank you. He stood up. He bowed. He left. He didn't look back. His back was straight, for the first time in a year, as if gratitude had straightened what the minerals couldn't. Daniel could feel his tears through the groundwater all the way to the village. Salty, warm, pure. Yuna came at night. The last night. She knew. Daniel hadn't told her. He hadn't sent her a dream. She just knew. 3 years spent alongside a spirit teach you to sense the water, even if you're human. She sat on the bank, dangled her feet, not in the water, next to it. She never dipped her feet in the water. That was her boundary, her way of not getting attached. She said that if he was doing this for the boy in Hwaseong, it was foolish. There were other ways. He could send Hana with a jug. You could send jeong. You could teach the locals to purify the water themselves. You could wait another year. 2. 10. Jeong waited 120 years. He could wait too. Daniel wrote with duckweed, not for the sake of one boy, for the sake of all the boys in all the villages I can't reach. For the sake of every mother who coughs up blood because her well is poisoned and I'm too far away. For the sake of every old man who buries his grandchildren because rice won't grow in dead water. Yuna read it, in silence. The duckweed blurred. Daniel added more. I was an engineer. Engineers don't build for themselves. They build for everyone. Yuna fell silent for a long time. She sat on the shore. She looked at the stars reflecting in the water. Then she asked quietly, You would have stayed for me. Daniel didn't answer, because the answer was yes, and because that answer didn't change anything. Yuna nodded. She said she knew. She stood up. She did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She took off her boots. She took off her socks. She waded into the water up to her ankles, the cold water of the autumn lake. She stood there. Daniel embraced her feet, with warm water, gently, desperately, as if it were possible to hold on to something through the touch of water on the skin. She stood there for a minute, maybe two. Daniel didn't count. Then she stepped out. She took off her shoes, smoothed out her pant legs, said without turning around, "I'll remember that the water was warm." She left. In the morning, Daniel was talking to Eri. She'd come early, before Minso. That was unusual. She always arrived later than everyone else, like someone who wasn't used to being the first to arrive anywhere except for business meetings. She sat down on the platform, carefully. She smoothed out her dress. She looked at the water. She said that Hana had told her. Daniel wasn't surprised. Hana didn't know how to keep secrets. She kept knowledge, and for her, secrets and knowledge were one and the same. Eri said she'd drawn up a plan, just in case. Who would manage the pilgrimage? How to distribute the water among the villages? How to collect offerings fairly? How to care for the sick? How to pay for Hana and Jeong's work? 3 pages, on plain paper, not silk. She placed the papers on the platform next to her. Daniel looked at them through the water. Neat, small handwriting. Charts, tables, schedules. Just like back then, 3 years ago, when she'd come with a business plan to sell holy water. Only now the plan wasn't for selling. It was for caring. She'd learned. He wrote in duckweed, "Thank you." Eri nodded. She stood up. She said she'd go check today's schedule. At the trailhead, she turned around. She said he was the first person to turn her down, and in doing so had given her more than anyone else ever had. She left. Jeong was the last to arrive among those he wanted to talk to. She had known for a long time. She could hear rryeong at the bottom. She heard her stirring. She heard the 2 voices inside the lake intertwining. She sat down on the platform. She dangled her feet in the water. Daniel could sense her thoughts. Quiet, serious, 10 years old, eyes far too mature. She said she wouldn't say goodbye, because he isn't leaving, he's changing. Just as water changes shape as it flows from the lake into the river and from the river into the sea. She would listen to the new lake. And if, somewhere in the depths, she heard a voice calculating the pH and grumbling that the duckweed was growing the wrong way, she would know it was him. Daniel wanted to answer. He couldn't. If only water had tears. He chose a day, the 23rd of the 9th month of the 3rd year, the day Minso first brought a flatbread. An anniversary. A starting point. The morning was clear, no fog, for the first time this fall. The sky was blue and high. Through the square window in the sanctuary's roof, light fell directly onto the water. Golden, pure. Everyone had come. Not because they knew. Boksu knew, Hana knew, Yuna knew, Eri knew, Jeong knew. The rest simply sensed it. The entire village, all 160 people. They stood on the shore, on the path, and on the platform, in silence. The children weren't making a sound. Not even the youngest ones. Sogyeon rustled with pine needles on the hill. Her pine tree stood straight and green. Beautiful, just like 400 years ago. Even the spirit of the stone from the distant spring trembled through a connection thinner than a hair. It didn't understand what was happening, but it sensed that the world was changing. Minso approached the offering stone. She placed a cake, a crooked one, just like the first one. She had baked it crooked on purpose. She said, "Good morning, Ajoshi," just like every morning, just like 1,000 mornings before that. Daniel replied, not as a ripple, not as a duckweed, with his voice. For the first time in 3 years, at the top of his lungs. Not a whisper from the water, a voice that came from the depths and rose up and filled the entire valley. Quiet, clear, like the sound of a bronze bell in the stillness of the night. "Good morning, Minso." She froze. Everyone froze. He was speaking. To each one sentence at a time. "Boksu, you're my first believer and my best friend, and I want you to drink this water every day because I've put everything I know about the old ways into it." Boksu laughed through his tears. "Hana." Everything I know, you now know, and these 7 notebooks are worth more than all the Order's sacred books because they contain the truth. Hana pressed the notebook to her chest. Yuna, you're stronger than you think, and you don't need forgiveness because you've already made everything right, she said, and the water was warm. Yuna turned away. Her shoulders didn't flinch, but Daniel could feel it through the damp earth beneath her boots. Eri, you came here to trade and stayed to serve, and that's worth more than any contract you'll ever sign. Eri straightened up, chin up, eyes wet, back straight. Jeong, listen to the water, and it will tell you more than I've had time to. You are the future of this valley. Don't be afraid of what you hear at the bottom. She's kind. She's just like me, only older and stronger. Jeong nodded. Seriously, no tears. Like a grown-up. Minso. He fell silent. Minso stood by the offering stone, a flatbread in her hand. She waited. You're stronger than me, little one. You've always been stronger. From the very first day. From the very first flatbread. I didn't save you. You saved me. Minso didn't cry. She looked at the water. She placed the flatbread on the stone, and she said, Goodbye, Ajosi. Not goodbye, just goodbye. Because she knew. She had always known. Water doesn't go away. It changes form. Daniel fell silent. He dove in, inside, to the bottom, into the silt, into the darkness, into that place where, 3 years ago, he was born within the slumbering remains of Sedion. She was there, not asleep, not awake, in between, on the threshold. Her consciousness was like a vast lake within his lake, warm, ancient, full of memories of 1,000 years of caring for water and people. She was waiting for him. He touched her. She touched him. Hello, little one. Hello. I'm ready. I know. You're sure. He thought of Minso, of her dirty knees, of the boy in Hwaseon with yellow skin, of the hundreds of villages he couldn't reach. Yes. It will hurt. No, little one. It'll be like water pouring into water. They merged. Not instantly, slowly, like 2 streams meeting at a river's mouth. His knowledge of pH and bioremediation and phytoremediation and heavy metal precipitation and the solubility table and the rhizosphere of the marsh iris and nitrogen-fixing bacteria and mycorrhizal spores mingled with her power. Ancient, profound, a power that could lift a river, lower a mountain, and purify the air for tens of kilometers around. His memories of Seattle, the rain on the laboratory windows, the taste of coffee from the vending machine, his ex-wife's face, and the smell of a well in Laos, blended with her memories of 1,000 springs, 1,000 harvests, and 1,000 children jumping into the lake in the summer. His love for Minso, Hana, Boksu, Yuna, Eri, and Cheon, and even for the grumpy Sogyong on the hill, mingled with her love for every person who had ever drunk from Taeho over the course of 1,000 years. 2 drops of oil, one from Seattle, one from Haedong Shin. They touched, they spread into one another. They became one. It didn't hurt, like water pouring into water. Up above, on the surface, people saw it. The lake burst into light, not fire, light, pure blue light from the very depths. 7 meters of water became as clear as air. You could see every stone on the bottom, every root, every fish, every snail. The irises on the western shore bloomed all at once. Hundreds of white flowers on green stems. At the end of September, when they're not supposed to bloom. The reeds in the north stood up straight and rustled even though there was no wind. The water rose. 5 sand meters. 10. 20. The lake was growing. Its boundaries were expanding. The water crept up to the roots of the trees on the shore, and the trees did not retreat but drank it in. New shoots burst forth on the Sogyeon pine, bright green. Hundreds, thousands. Every dead branch sprouted needles. The pine creaked and straightened. By a meter. By 2. The 400-year-old tree stood straight and green and strong, just as in its youth. Jeong stood on the platform and listened. Not Daniel's voice, not rryeong's voice. The voice of the lake. New, different. It held the depth of 1,000 years and the precision of an engineering calculation. It held the tenderness of an ancient goddess and the dry humor of a man who mentally grumbled at rituals involving wormwood. Stronger than either of them alone. Quieter than either of them alone. As if all the water in the world had sighed and spoken a single word. Thank you. Minso stood on the shore, a flatbread on a rock. Wet eyes, dry cheeks. She wasn't crying, because the water was warm and familiar and alive. She dipped her hand into the lake, and the lake embraced her fingers. Gently, tenderly, familiarly, just as it had embraced her every evening when Hana came, just as it had embraced Yuna's feet on that last night, only stronger. Minso whispered, "Ajoshi." The lake replied, not with a word, but with a ripple. A single circle. Warm, gentle. Yes, I'm here. Not him, not her. Them. Everything he knew, everything she remembered. Together. Forever. Hana stood next to Minso, her hand in the water. She could feel it. The water was different, deeper, wider, more powerful. But there was a note in it that she recognized. Quiet, warm. The one that had embraced her fingers every evening. The one that had dictated bioremediation formulas to her and grumbled when she wrote down the names of the bacteria incorrectly. She smiled. She opened her 8th notebook, a blank one. She wrote down the date and the first observation of the new day. The water had changed. It had become clearer. Its power had grown. It hadn't gone away. It had become greater. 7 notebooks of knowledge. A sanctuary above the water, 10 villages drinking clean water, 26 children who grew up healthy, elderly people living to a ripe old age, wells being purified throughout the valley, a network of observers that will protect against the silver, a priestess who will record everything, a diplomat who will organize everyone, a warrior who will not let anyone destroy what has been built, Odin who will hear what no one else hears, and a little girl with dirty knees who will bring a lopsided flatbread every morning and say, "Good morning." Lake Tahoe shone under the autumn sun, crystal clear to the bottom, deeper than ever, more alive than ever. And somewhere far to the north, in a mountain spring, water gurgled. Clear, warm. The spirit of the stone by the road felt a surge of strength. For the first time in 40 years, it straightened up. For the first time in 40 years, the stone became warm to the touch. A passerby who was walking by stopped. He touched the stone. He was surprised. He walked on his way, but he looked back. And somewhere to the west, in a ravine, the piles of a dead bridge rang out. A tree that had been rotting for 50 years suddenly became solid. Water from a crack in the rock flowed down the piles, into a stream, clear, cold, alive. The spirit of the bridge opened its eyes, if one can say that of a bridge, and it heard a distant voice, strong and quiet at the same time, both engineering and ancient. You are not alone. And in the capital of Hansong, in the basement of the central temple, in the private chambers of the celestial emperor, behind 3 locks and 5 seals, stood a silver mirror. The oldest, the largest. It held the main part of rryeong, the part that had been taken away 120 years ago. The mirror cracked, a thin line running from the top edge to the bottom. Silently, at night. No one saw it, but water began to flow from the crack. Clear, warm. It smelled of irises. A drop fell onto the stone floor. A second. A third. By morning, a small puddle had formed at the base of the mirror, and floating in the puddle was a white iris petal. Somewhere in a distant valley, Minso was clearing yesterday's flowers from the offering stone. She was arranging fresh ones. She washed the stone. She was getting ready for a new day. Behind her, on the platform, Hana opened her notebook and began to write. Under a pine tree on the hill, Jeong listened to the wind. On the path to the village, Eri was posting the new schedule for pilgrims. By the well, Yuna was teaching a young man from Hwasong how to answer questions from strangers. In a house on the edge of the village, Baksu was drinking his morning tea, and his knees hardly hurt at all. The lake shimmered, quiet, warm, bottomless, full of life and memory and knowledge and strength. And every morning a misshapen rice cake was placed on the offering stone, and every morning warm ripples answered all around. Yes, I am here.